I realise I'm just about to bring a vPub to you to talk about how malt whisky is quite a recent thing. But of course, it isn't. And I've actually tasted a malt whisky from 1884, distilled in 1884. So it's been around for a long, long time. But we'll get to that in a minute. See you on the other side. Hello, whisky folk. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. Looking forward to spending another couple of hours with you, however long it takes, to have a wee reflection on the evolution of specifically malt whisky. Why do I want to talk about that? Well, I want to kind of give it context. I want to kind of talk about where we are today, how we arrived here with this amazing selection of whiskies and where it came from, how malt whisky came about, how we come to interact with it today, and how that's quite different from how we used to interact with it in the past. But more on that in a wee minute. I don't want to waste too much time blethering tonight. I'm going to jump straight into the lounge tonight and try and welcome some of you beautiful whisky folk and dedicated barflies. I feel really bad. I'm going to start with a wee apology to someone, a lovely gentleman who I met at my local Royal Mail depot this week. There's only 3 allowed in at a time right now, so you've got to wait outside because of obviously there's still the COVID restrictions and things. So I was patiently waiting outside, face and phone, in a world of my own, in a bubble of my own. And I was wearing one of the light grey polo shirts with an Aqua Vitae logo on it. And a gentleman came out and stood in front of me and kind of took a step back and did a double take and went, "Oh, hello, Roy. How are you doing?" He had a mask on, and clearly I had a mask on. And then I just kind of looked at him and just kind of said, "Oh, hi." And then he just kind of walked away. And as he walked away, he said, "Sláinte." My reaction couldn't have been more inappropriate. I was just startled and taken aback. And obviously I realized that he'd spotted the shirt and then looked at me and worked out that it was me. And I never took a moment to just say, and he just kind of walked away before I got my thoughts together and thought that would have been just so nice to just chat to him for a minute or find out who he was. If it was you and if I was foolish at the Royal Mail depot in Glasgow just on Tuesday morning and you said hello to me and I behaved bizarrely, I apologise. I was shipping merch, I was looking at my phone, and I was in a wee bubble of my own. So I'll raise a glass to you now and say sláinte. And it was nice to say hello at the very least, sorry. There's going to be lots of you in the lounge now saying, "It was me, it was me, it was me, I was the man." Welcome, everyone. Jerry Miller is here saying, "Good evening, Roy. Hope you're well. Jerry, I'm doing very, very well. I hope you are too." Gerben Blocker is here saying, "Good evening. Good to see you, Gerben." And Jed Smith is saying, "Looking forward to hearing from Iain. He was a few years above me at Carnoustie High." So there you go. A fellow alumni at Carnoustie High, Jed Smith and Iain Forteath at the same school. Iain's giving you a wee nod in the background. Jed, superb to have you, and my friend, superb to have you. Tom Scaramouche is here saying, "Hi, Roy, good to have you too, Tom." Peter Frank is here. Joe Prestera is here as well. Fantastic Joe, fantastic Frank. Molasses is here saying, "Happy vPub Day, Roy." Happy vPub Day to you, my friend. It's wonderful to have you and always great to see you here. Andrew Butler is here as well. Excellent. And of course, the legend that is Jimmy Legg is in saying, "Hi, Roy, surprise, I'm here." Jimmy, it's not a vPub until you turn up, my friend. It really isn't. Dave Cummins is here as well. Good to have you, Dave. Eric Cunliffe. Helen, hopefully sat next to Andy. Jaime, not Jamie. Good to have you in, Jaime. Always wonderful to welcome you. Durpass Whiskey Tim is here. Graham Young, Gary Carew, Arnie Tiger, Richard Hall, Max over in Austria, Marcus Kreitner, Curtis Campbell in the States. Good to have you, Curtis. My cousin Kevin is in as well. Good to have you, buddy. Kevin Grant on whiskey. Let's see if I'm missing any comments. Jamie Brown is saying, "Need to hear you sing." Oh, yes. Wait a minute, Mr. Postman. Wait, Mr. Postman. Yes. I felt a wee bit, you know, that way where you just feel like really quite embarrassed after it. But you're not really expecting anybody to kind of spot you from this thing out at your local post office. So it was quite a surprise, and penny didn't drop until he just kind of said, as he was walking away, slancha, like that. Wonderful. Jason Whisky Wise is here. Good to have you, saying good evening, Aquavita, and good evening all. Jason's back doing his video content now as well. So his channel is back up and running after being on hiatus, so he could focus on his whiskey job for a while. Jason, it's good to have you back, buddy, and it's wonderful to welcome you in the vPub. And Alistair Gray is in here as well. I noticed Alistair had his hands on a very nice bottle of Dingle. Dingle's new release seems to have just dropped, and Alistair managed to get himself a bottle, and he shared it in the Aquavita Facebook Barflies page. It looked very tasty too. Haven't tried it myself yet. Polyester Landscape is saying, thanks for the great content every week. Much appreciated. Can't stay for the vPub. We'll catch the replay later for sure. Cheers. Love picking up your comments. It's wonderful to welcome you in. And thank you very much for the virtual drama as well. And thank you for being grateful too. Nice to have you here, my friend. Cheers to you. I'm going to put this aside. This is a wee Glencadam. I'm going to be drinking a few Glencadams tonight, I think. But I want to pause for a wee moment here. I've got something quite special in the glass, and I shared this with patrons on my lock-in on Sunday night. Last year, I lost one of my local friends and neighbours, a gentleman he was. I'll always be very, very grateful for the time we had together, especially when we shared time over a dram of whiskey. He liked to dram, and he liked to come over and spend time having a wee dram with me. His wife poured very, very generous samples for me from his collection. She literally just opened these bottles in front of me and poured these huge samples. And they're really quite rare things. This is an original 1970s Gunnar MacPhail licensed Glen Grant, a 10-year-old from the early 70s. Quite phenomenal. That's what's in the glass right now. And this is an SMWS from 1977 Glenlossie, 46.3, only the third ever cask of Glenlossie that they did. Despite being bottled in 1990 as a 12-year-old, look how dark that liquid is. It's almost black. And it's fabulous stuff too. So I want to raise a wee glass to my friend Pat, but I also want to raise a glass to another couple of people that's brought to my attention that we've lost too, and I didn't know about this. Hamish Malcolm actually sent me an email to say, Roy, I was trying to get your attention in a vPub, and I wanted to give a friend a shout out, and it was a gentleman from Aberdeen, from the whiskey shop in Aberdeen. And I don't know this gentleman. His name was Scott Dunn. And the terrifying thing is that he died at a very young age, 47 years old, just a couple of weeks ago. And it's always super sad when you hear somebody passing, but when it's young, I think it smarts even more. So I wanted to raise a wee glass to Scott Dunn as well. And over the last couple of weeks, I've been meaning also to raise a glass for Colin Dunn, who we lost too. He's one of the old guard. He's best known for Ben Nevis, of course, but he's been elsewhere in the industry too. And I think it's appropriate just to raise a wee glass and pause for a minute to think about our friends, to think about the Pats of this world, to think about Scott Dunn up in Aberdeen, and to think about Colin Ross as well. I'll raise this wee glass and say thank you, gentlemen, for your time here. Thank you for your whiskey. Thank you for your moments. Cheers. Terrific. Wonderful treat of a sip of history to sip that as well. This is a 10-year-old Glen Grant, full of old bottle effect, but still quite fresh and fruity. Gentle white fruit, little apple-y. Delicate spice. It's only 40% ABV. It's actually 70 degrees proof in old money, but that's the equivalent of 40% today. It's different from American proof, of course, but just an amazing sip of whiskey history. I'm also grateful to Hamish Malcolm as well for bringing it to our attention. Scott Dunn in Aberdeen. Whiskey Radar is saying, here's to all the Pats. Thank you, Roland. Thank you so much. And Highland Hamish is here saying, thanks, Roy. Thank you, Hamish. Thanks so much. Ryan Sutherland is saying slancha as well. Everybody's raising wee glasses in the chat. RIP all, sleep easy. Sorry for the loss of your friend, Roy, says Jason Whisky Wise. Me too. It's been a long time, but he's one of these men. He had such a presence. And if I stop for just a heartbeat, it's easy to hear his voice. He had such a unique voice. And it's Gone but not forgotten, right? And what a treat it is to be able to just kind of contemplate the times that we had together over these whiskies that he kept squirreled away in his collection. And I knew that he had a few that he knew were a wee bit more special, or perhaps a bit older or antique, and he was keeping them for special occasions and special moments. And I know that his wife has plans to bottle and share the rest of those 2 bottles with his other whisky friends as well, the ones that are going to enjoy those whiskies that would have enjoyed them with him while he was here. So I think it's a wonderful gesture too, and I feel very privileged to have some of this amazing liquid. Brian Kilco Whisky Musings is in as well, raising a wee glass. Good to see you, Brian. And Gregor Dykman is in too. Thanks, Gregor. Thanks for your nice wishes. Superb. So tonight's vPub is something that fascinates me, and you hear me talking about it often. You hear me talking about the way that we interact with our whiskey in this country. You hear me talking about the idea that malt is relatively new when it comes to something that's available that you can just walk into a shop and buy. It wasn't always the case that you could buy this whiskey. Blends have been king for as long as anybody can remember. And it wasn't until the 1960s came along that you started to see brands, obviously famously started in 1963 by Glenfiddich, closely followed by Glenlivet, Glenmorangie, and even Ardbeg and Laphroaig and all these other brands started to be marketed in their own right. Now, they always had been, but not aggressively and not in every market. It was kind of piecemeal things. It was really the 1960s that saw malt begin to be marketed in its own right, because they had the depth of stocks, perhaps, because they had the consistency dialed into the malt whiskies. Now, it wasn't like they were all over the place and had to be blended every batch after batch. But of course, what happened is they followed in the footsteps of the blends. Malt whisky had always been around, but it was seen as something that was heavy and fully flavoured and off-putting to a lot of people who were after a delicate spirit, something similar to maybe a brandy, a cognac, or whatever it was that was an alternative out there for them. So there's a lot of very light, delicate blends out there. And so malt whisky was something that was added to grain spirit since the middle of the 19th century in order to season that grain spirit and put something out there that was affordable, easy, but more than anything, it could be kept consistent and therefore it could be branded. So for single malts to come out, they just followed in that same model. So it had to be something that came from a distillery that had that depth of stock in order to provide a consistent product. It had to be something that could be relied upon to be vaguely similar, bottle after bottle, year after year. In the country that I'm from, it wasn't like it is today where people are trying different things and comparing different things. People had a brand that they enjoyed. They finished the bottle and they replaced the bottle, much like you would beer or coffee or whatever else it was you were enjoying. You had a brand that you enjoyed and you replaced it as such. That's the way it was with whiskey. And when malts came along, the Glenfiddichs and everything else, it was kind of a similar thing. And wouldn't you know it, the presentation was the same. That legacy that blends just kind of handed on to malts, 40%. When chill filtration came a mass market thing, when that came on the scene, it was chill filtered as well. We didn't get to know what the cask, most of these casks, is it bourbon, is it sherry? It was all just distillery wood. It was just distillery wood back in the day. There were the days where they could rejuvenate casks with Paxarette and things to make it more kind of active in a sherry style, let's say. And it wasn't until around about that time as well, the 60s and 70s, that we started to see huge stocks of American oak coming across ex-bourbon casks. Perfect timing, because the 50s and the 60s was boom time for Scotch, and it wasn't until it hit the late 70s that downturn came, and that was a brown spirits downturn. Whiskey suffered hugely from that, blends, and of course all the malt distilleries that were required for those blends suffered too. But a strange thing happened. Malt whiskey stayed strong. The niche, that enthusiast, connoisseur, geek, expert, whatever you want to call the people that were following malts, they kept following the malts and they wanted more of it. catered for by the few brands that were out there, but also by the independent bottlers, the likes of Gordon and MacPhail and Cadenheads. The industry took note of this climbing. And in 1988, you saw Diageo completely change the concept of what whiskey could be. And I'm speaking to people in Scotland, by putting out the classic malts and having 6 whiskies on a plinth with completely different flavour profiles that could be consistently maintained. This was a completely new thing. So everybody started to hear that word, malt whisky. And there was a kudos with it. And I remember in my younger years, there was a difference between somebody holding up a blended Scotch. That was just a bottle of whiskey. We never called Scotch. Nobody in Scotland refers to whiskey as Scotch. I do because I speak to you guys, but generally it's whiskey. But if we hold up malt, we tend to say a bottle of malt. That is kind of what it was. We wanted to distinguish between the two. So malt was seen to be a different thing. And of course, as time's gone on, that climb of popularity throughout the 1990s into the 21st century as well, 2005, that seems to be when things really took fire. It just kind of caught on and things exploded. And now we're in a situation where I'm speaking to you tonight from a producer who's gone from a blending legacy into trying to secure themselves a distillery that could fit with their model and their profile. And then move on from that to having a second distillery and maybe having just 1 or 2 expressions out of malt whiskey. It's difficult to count how many expressions have come from that distillery just in the last, those 2 distilleries, sorry, just in the last 10 to 20 years. Like all the distilleries, all the producers that are out there, the ones that are bringing core ranges, it's dizzying the variety that we have today. It's incredible to think that back in the 60s, you would be lucky to be able to walk into your local supermarket and get more than 1 or 2 brands. Quite incredible. That's kind of what I want to talk to you about tonight. And I've obviously leaning heavily on the insight of Iain Forteath, who has been for a long time the global brand ambassador for Angus Dundee, but more recently has taken over the reins as a blender, master blender for them too. So it's very, very interesting to speak to him. He's one of the kind of the newer generation, let's say, of whiskey makers out there. So it's going to be interesting to talk to him about that evolution of whiskey, how it's been seen through the lens of his organisation through Angus Dundee, how they see where they are today, what kind of plans they have got for the imminent future, and where they see this category going off into the distance. Are we going to see more enthusiast-driven product, or are we going to see more demands put on the category from growing and emerging markets and things like that? I think that's going to be quite interesting. If you're trying to get hold of my attention, of course you know what to do. Just tag me Aquavitae, and I'll do the very, very best to speak to my guest tonight, but also to pick up the comments from you guys as well. Whiskey Throttle Daniel is saying, very sorry for your loss. I completely understand, as we lost our father on Monday, Daniel. Oh, that's terrible. That's so sorry to hear. That's much, much too close to home. Daniel, I'll raise a wee glass to you, my friend, and say I'm very, very sorry for your loss too. Daniel, I'm looking forward to raising a glass with you again too. I'm missing you, fella. I'm sorry to hear your sad news. Cheers. And Falscraft Frank is saying, just lit a candle to all absent and gone friends. Slantia. What a wonderful gesture, my friend. Thank you so much. Your sound has, you sounded some stumblers in my place, but it's solved now. It might have been my computer. I hope not. When we were getting ready, there was a couple of wee hitches tonight. The connection wasn't perfect. Tell me, hopefully I'm coming through nice and clear now. If anybody's having issues with audio or video, I'm not sure what I can do. I've got a cable plugged in. I'm doing everything I can. Gary Carew saying, great variety, but some of the prices are discouraging. We'll talk about that. I don't know exact figures, but it seems like 10 to 15 increase over the last 18 months. I started my journey on the wrong end of the boom. I know how you feel, Gary. I really do. I know how you feel. And that's when we work together as a community to try and dial in and figure out who's bringing the good stuff at reasonable prices and it's accessible. Whiskey Throttle is saying, thank you, Roy. Miss you as well. Cheers, Daniel. Cheers, buddy. Thomas Elmer is in saying, so long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us and we shall remember them. What a wonderful thought, and I agree with you fully. That is exactly true. No sound problems here at all. Excellent, Jimmy. Thanks so much. And Ian Graham is saying the audio is fine. And Peter is saying, poured myself a fab Glencadam 16-year-old. I'm getting confused between Fab and Peathead, I think. 16-year-old to stay with the theme. I've been buying and squirreling away Glencadams recently on the Celebration vPub. I opened the 21-year-old. I'm halfway through it now. It's half a bottle here. Of course, I've been sharing it. I sent a few of those out, but I'm really, really enjoying it. You know how I feel about the 10-year-old because I put a dedicated video out last year for Glencadam 10. But it made me confident to go forward and pick up other releases from Glencadam too. Stefan Novak bought me and gifted me, just arrived one day. It's amazing. Stefan sent me the Andalucía Reserve from Glencadam. So I've got that here as well, still sealed. Might get uncorked tonight. And on the recommendation of Iain, as we were talking about what kind of styles of whiskey I prefer, he kind of encouraged me not to miss out on the Glencadam 18. So hopefully we'll get a chance to try that tonight as well. Here and see you, 5 out of 5 says okay, perfect, 5 out of 5. Thank you, Menno. He's obviously referencing the brutal quiz that we had from Menno last week. There is a quiz at the end tonight, of course there is. There might be some kind of theme related questions in there tonight, some Angus Dundee questions too, but I guarantee you it's surely got to be easier than a Menno quiz. Surely it's got to be easier than the quiz that we had last week from Menno. It was great fun, but I only managed a pass mark because Menno threw me a bit of a clue and a bone on the final question, and I managed a 5 out of 10. The worst I've ever done in a quiz, but that's the fun of it, as long as you have a bit of fun and you're learning out of it as well. Eric Cunliffe is saying, Glencadam 15 in the glass currently. I noticed the Andalucía is missing from the shelf. Yes, there's a gap where it used to be. There you go. And the 10-year-old was right behind it, so that's been pulled as well. Whiskey Central is saying, any hero whiskies in the works? Do you know, it's funny because I have a wee list of my hero whiskies, and either because somebody else has been there and I didn't want to be a Johnny come lately, and I need to kind of make a hero whiskey and just make a bit of fun of that and just apologise for the fact that it's been 6 months at least, and just kind of bring light to why I couldn't make the hero whiskies I wanted to make. Because one of the biggest things about the hero whiskies is that they've got to be natural, they've got to be affordable, and they've got to be available, right? And I was scuppered on every single one for one of those reasons. So we'll talk more about that in a wee bit. Menno is stuck in quiz mode, says Chris Pollack. Absolutely. And Andrew Butler is saying, but I like Menno quizzes. Andrew, that's because you do exceptionally well at them. Better than me, my friend. Good to have you in, Andrew, as always. Let's reach out to my friend. Let's reach out to my guest tonight. How are we doing for time? Not too bad, just before 10 past. This is a gentleman that, as I say to you, has recently been handed the role of Master Blender. Now, Robert Fleming is the guy that's been in charge of Angus Dundee's production and whiskey making for years now. And Robert is still very much there. He's still very much part of it. Almost 5 decades in the industry, Robert. But he's handed over the curation. Let's say he's going to be taking care of everything that goes into the cask, then a bit of a handshake of maturation, and then Iain Forteath gets to continue his role as making whiskey, being Master Blender. So we'll get to talk to Iain a wee bit about that. Iain, if you're good to come in, give me a wee thumbs up, my friend. Fantastic. We'll welcome in Iain Forteath. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, Roy. How are you?
Looking spiffing too. Are you comfortable?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I thought I'd make a bit of an effort, although this is a polo shirt. I couldn't iron the shirt. I thought it was too much. But
superb. Yeah. We don't care how you look, but you are looking fantastic, honestly, buddy. I'm going to start with a wee anecdote. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
I was at a tasting with you, and I specifically came to this tasting because I had some awkward questions. And it just so happened to be you that was hosting the tasting. I think it was probably in the before times, but not much before we were all closed down. So maybe January, February last year. You had injured your hand. That might help you a wee bit.
Yeah, it was just after Valentine's Day because I accidentally flambéed my hand, which was good. So yeah, that was it. I think it was like
fun. That's right.
Yeah.
So, and it was a Tomintoul vertical tasting. And I was curious because the range from Tomintoul had always puzzled me a wee bit, that you had this kind of let's say, kind of more typical legacy presentation of 40% ABV products, a reasonable range that has grown over the years. But then you had a current favourite of mine, and certainly was a current favourite of mine last year at that time, was the 14-year-old, which was more expensive than the 16-year-old. Yes, exactly. But the reason I was engaging with it was I felt I was engaging with it is it had a bit more spice, it had a bit more grip, a bit more interactivity with the ABV at 46% on that one.
Yeah.
And I felt the body was more intact. Of course, I'm telling myself that's the case, right? I don't really have anything to compare it directly against. But what I realized is that this is something that's happening here. There's an evolution maybe here. There's a toe in the water here. I don't know what's going on. And I came to you in that tasting and I hit you with these questions. But what struck me, and the question I want to ask you, when you gave us that tasting and you took us through the whiskies, and the way you referenced the whiskies, the way you compared them, what you talked about, it wasn't always about what was in the glass. You were trying to give it context. And you were pulling on a deep knowledge from the industry and other products out there. And what came across is passion. And I'm suspicious that you're a wee bit of a whiskey geek, Iain. Would that be right?
It's very true, yeah. I don't really hide behind it either, but it's literally that bookshelf behind me is full of whiskey books. That's how much of a life I have. But I literally, I joined the industry from being an enthusiast, and I've just kind of got hooked, I suppose. Not in an alcoholic sense, but I really love all things whiskey. I think the heritage, and obviously the products and the history and the passion that goes into it has kind of really rubbed off on me. And I'm now fortunate that I literally get to make it for a living, which is not so bad. But I would definitely class myself as a whiskey geek. I mean it endearingly too, to anyone else that's out there that puts themselves in the same classification.
That's right. Some of us are quite happy to self-refer as geeks or whatever. There's no offense meant by it, but absolutely I can get geekish about whiskey. And I'm hoping that there's going to be a couple of points tonight that we can kind of get a wee bit geekish, and that's okay. You're in very good company to do that very thing. Cool. So welcome you behind the bar at the vPub.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be a barfly.
Yes. It's something you do watch, and I very much appreciate it. Thanks, Iain. Thanks so much. But I'd say that that's kind of what made you an obvious person for me to reach out and grab and invite to come on. Thanks. Because of that passion. And also, recently when I understood what your position and your new role was going to be, I think that was quite an interesting handover as well. Yeah. There was an evolution happening there. Something that, the newer generation of whiskey makers was coming through. We're seeing it elsewhere in the industry now as well, with various people in the industry starting to get involved in whiskey creation, and very young people. I use Kelsey as an example up at Grant's, right? Very young people getting involved in this really quite significant role with a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. I think it needs passion and love for the product to be able to pull it off faithfully. But let me ask you, you're in that role now. You're there, and we'll talk a wee bit about what you do day to day. Yeah. When I talked about evolution, does any of that kind of strike a chord with you? Did you ever find yourself plundering the history books to wonder how such a thing came about, and how did blends become the dominant force, and why was malts being such a hidden treasure all those years until recently? It's an interesting topic, isn't it?
Well, I think when you kind of mentioned the topic, I thought it was really interesting to dive into because it kind of rings bells with what Angus and Dundee are doing. But actually, from my perspective as well, I suppose I'm lucky that I joined the industry after single malts were a thing. So I started drinking whiskey in 2000. I'll say 18 for legal reasons, but 2005. And by that point, kind of things were already on the up. In terms of, 2005 was not 18 for legal reasons, but 18 for legal reasons. You're
giving away your age here.
I know. I'm actually 63. I just drink whiskey every day.
Whiskey is an elixir, right enough.
I think that so my dad and my grandfather were the people that really got me into whiskey, and they were drinking malts. I don't really remember what they were drinking at the time, but I remember kind of having experiences with rough blends and them saying, no, like if you're going to drink whiskey, you should drink this stuff. And they kind of showed me what good malts were and let me kind of appreciate that flavor. And I think that even from that age, although I couldn't really afford to drink whiskey of that kind of quality, it was something that I had a real kind of passion for. I kind of had an almost kind of resonance with it. I like the fact that it's an industry that's been around for hundreds of years. It's very Scottish at its roots. It's a big part of Scottish culture and history, and I think I've always kind of had that comfort with it, and it's kind of given me that want to know more. So yeah, and I think that kind of looking at that in terms of where it came from, the fact that single malts are still quite a new thing, really. Obviously, distilleries were always making malt whiskies, single malt whiskies, but they weren't necessarily releasing them as that.
And certainly the term's a very recent term. So you probably remember from those men kind of introducing you and saying, well, if you're going to drink whiskey and you're going to enjoy it as a neat thing, have a look. Do you remember that definition they had between a generic bottle of whiskey and a bottle of malt, and that kind of kudos that had as malt? Right?
100%. I remember playing, I think it was a rugby championship when I was 18, and one of the prizes with a raffle was a bottle of Glenmorangie. And I remember being like, oh, we'll just crack this open. And my dad was like, that's a bottle of malt, Iain. He's like, you don't just neck that. And I remember that was the distinction. I'm like, oh, right, so this stuff's the good stuff. Which again is maybe generalizing, because there's lots of brilliant blends out there as well. And obviously my job involves both. And I can testify that you can make great blended whiskies. But the malt category, even in the time that I've worked in the industry, so I've worked in whiskey for the last 10 years, but even the change from then till now is massive. When you look at it from a kind of snapshot overview, and it's still evolving, and obviously now we're in a totally different age of whiskey evolution. And things like age statements are up for debate, and things like sustainability are a big part of whiskey now, and also kind of continuity and availability of stocks. These are all things which are affecting the industry that had done so in the past, but actually led to the collapse of a lot of it in different places. So it's interesting to be in that part of history, and I suppose be in the shoes of people that I read about, which is quite cool to get a look at.
That is, and it's what we are seeing now is a time that it almost feels like the buzz is just almost so it's too big to kind of manage sometimes. Allocations, prices, crazy auction prices as well. So we can't, the stuff that we used to be able to say, oh, it's okay if it sells out because we'll always be able to pick it up a year down the line at auction. And but the prices are kind of, we are being challenged. But at the same time, what I always kind of try to do, and that's what we're going to do tonight, and we're honestly, we're going to celebrate a lot of the things that Angus Dundee have done. You know, there's no bones about it that if we talk about evolution and some of the ways I've connected with Angus Dundee products over the last couple of years, that's come because the market is right for it. You know, there's an audience out there that are willing to pay this extra money, and I appreciate what you said about the price, how it was a barrier of entry for you as a young guy who wasn't earning. Now I remember the same thing too. And when we talk about trying to get younger people into whiskey, we need to get younger people into whiskey. Those are the same people that are putting the prices up year after year. Sorry, you can't do both.
No, you're right.
Or you have to find a way to work a balance there. So I've discovered in Angus Dundee products, there's some fantastic quality there, an interesting varied lineup, and the prices still seem to be achievable. Your prices are climbing too, Iain.
They are. I mean, I'd like to think that the core range are quite attainable. And we can talk about that more as we go on. But yeah, it's one of these things. I think that they do creep up to keep up with the market. There's some top end stuff in terms of aging, but we always try to have something or a few bottles that are kind of below that 50 quid, 40 quid mark, depending on the age. Because
I've got those bottles on hand that I think it'd be good to kind of walk through. Which of these are available? Which of these are approaching discontinued and things, and which of these are kind of core range entry level stuff. There's two products here that are interesting for that reason. But if we think about Angus Dundee as an organization, then this is where, for the enthusiast, I think the jaggy end of things are taken care of by Glencadam. There are other things existing there and releases from Tomintoul, but your history, it doesn't go back to the 19th century, but that's where blends come from. But that's where you picked up. That's where Angus Dundee's roots are in blending. So how does a company that doesn't have a distillery, how does it come to fulfillment and selling multiple brands across multiple countries? What is Angus Dundee's roots all about?
So they're a pretty interesting company, and I mean that as they kind of welcome me like one of the family, but they are an independent family-owned company. And it was founded by a guy called Terry Hillman, who's still with us. He's now in his late 80s, and he's an amazing guy to work with actually, because he was a kind of pioneer of his time. And I'm sure every company starts that story, but he kind of saw a gap in the market where there was, so the blended whiskey was taking off. So Angus Dundee kind of really kicked into action. It was originally called Ballantyne Stewart, which then became Burns Stewart and Co. Yeah, it was with his dad that he kind of was working with them, and they effectively were a broker and blender. So they've set up a business of trying to create whiskies for customers. So whereas you had big brands kicking off back then, things like Chivas, you've got your kind of Johnny Walkers, of course, other big brand whiskies were taking off around the world. But Terry and his father kind of set up a business of saying, look, kind of, we can actually make you a whiskey of your specification. We can blend it. They had some really great kind of blenders on board as well. And they used to buy and sell and trade casks and create kind of bespoke products for customers. They also used to broker casks as well. And that literally existed from kind of the 50s up until 2000 when we bought our distillery. There was so Terry kind of eventually got quite ill in the 80s. Was told he actually wouldn't make it. Sold up his old company in the 80s, which was Burns Stewart Co., which obviously now a part of Distell.
Distell, yep.
Managed to rid himself of his ills, which was kind of a miraculous thing, and decided to start again using his contacts, his kind of some of his stock base that he already had, and kind of established Angus Dundee properly in the late 80s. And from then on, it was a case of kind of moving with the times. And although a lot of people probably even on the screen haven't heard of us, and I didn't really know that much about Angus Dundee until I started buying from them direct and really kind of struck up a relationship with them when I was working in retail. They're quite an amazing group. I mean, we account for probably just around 4% of the world's export, which is quite a lot when you've never heard of it.
But that 4% of the export, how much of that is blends versus malts, just as a kind of snapshot?
It's probably about 85% blended-ish.
Okay, so similar to the industry.
Yeah. So for us, I mean, blends are very much where we kind of cut our teeth. And although we're a distilling company with many decades of experience, the actual distilling element of it only came around in 2000. So until that period, we brokered and blended. We had our own kind of labels that we did. We did customer labels, but actually in 2000 we bought Tomintoul Distillery, and that was our kind of entry into the world of malts.
This is where it's interesting because it's in a more compact time frame, of course, 1950s, but you've got this kind of blending thing, and at some point, I guess in the late 90s or some point in the 90s, people are starting to realize we need a distillery here. We're going to need to, in order to be able to endure for the long term, we need a distillery, because they could see the whiskey loch behind them, the disaster, the brown spirits disaster of the late 70s and the 80s. And yet they saw that growth, that steady stability of the malt category. So Angus Dundee is kind of almost followed that kind of evolution, and they're not unique. There are other companies out there that have done the very same thing, of course. But it's kind of a nice kind of thing where blended whiskey was it was everything. It was the world. When people talked about whiskey, when people talked about Scotch, they were talking about blends. Even if it was Irish whiskey, it was a blended product as well. So it's kind of interesting. What do you think happened? What were the drivers for Angus Dundee to move out of that brokerage, bespoke whiskey type model, the blenders model, and actually into a distiller's model?
I think it was kind of a combination of two things. So speaking to Terry, again, if you ever get a chance, if I can ever get to introduce you, he occasionally comes to shows and things, but he's a really kind of inspirational guy in terms of he started from nothing and kind of built it to being what it is now. And he's got a really good ability to kind of keep a cool head and kind of oversee the bigger picture. So I think infrastructure has always been a big part of successful business for him. So whereas it's not necessarily about being really flash and making loads of money, it's more about building an establishment and a foundation that he can then pass on to his next generations. And actually speaking to him on the phone the other week, he was literally saying the same thing, that it's all about, so we currently, his son and daughter run the company now, the next generation's coming in after that. And it's got this real lovely kind of family touch to it, that he's very much about building something that's sustainable. So Tomintoul came around with two things. Firstly, the malt category was becoming a thing. So the malt category was becoming much more substantial in the world. If you don't have a malt distillery, it's kind of hard to establish your own malt category. Independent bottlers were obviously a thing, but independent brands of single malt weren't particularly popular back then.
Sure.
So part of that was it's great to get a malt distillery under the wing. There's obviously a supply element of as well. So it was probably split because really, obviously having your own malt distillery is a great base for blending as well, and that was still very much our business at the time. So it's kind of brought us into the world of single malts, and as that's kind of rolled on, it's rapidly become a big part of what we do. So from the purchasing of Tomintoul in 2000, we literally purchased Glencadam in 2003. We kind of got a taste for it. We decided that we wanted to kind of expand that network a bit more. So Tomintoul was established as a brand, I think, in 2001 from us. Obviously, there was a couple of bottlings before, mainly export-based.
And that timing would have been perfect because it's difficult to buy a distillery now.
Yeah.
But back in 2003, there was at least some availability out there for you to be able to make that move.
Yeah, so there was things in the market. Interestingly enough, and again, I don't want to steal too much of Robert's stories because a lot of what I learned is passed down from those guys. Books can teach you so much, but if you can get someone to kind of mentor you, and I've been fortunate to have kind of some pretty amazing individuals in Angus Dundee who have kind of taught me what to do in the whiskey industry and told me their stories. But effectively, when we went to purchase Tomintoul, we actually didn't want. We were offered Tamnavillin. I don't want to name and shame because they make great whiskey. And Terry went to see Tamnavillin, but he didn't want it. And Robert was working at White Mackay back at the time. Robert, our master distiller. We kind of managed to arrange a deal where he came with us. But effectively, we showed him around Tamnavillin, but they picked him up, took him past Tomintoul, and Terry's like, "This place seems pretty nice." And Robert's like, "Oh, it's not for sale. Sorry, it's not really for negotiation." And then so went to Tamnavillin and came back and he's like, "I don't want to buy Tamnavillin. I want to buy Tomintoul." And they're like, "It's not for sale." And there was a long negotiation period, effectively, where eventually Terry managed to convince them to sell.
That's interesting. I had no idea of that. That is interesting. And what you're alluding to there is the hope. And I suggested to you before we went live tonight that maybe in the future I'd like to have a vPub where I can have Robert on as well, especially.
Definitely. Well, I don't want to steal his stories.
Sure, they bear repeating anyway. Don't worry about it.
And again, I'm not discounting. I saw some comments that are coming in about Tamnavillin. I'm not Tamnavillin at the time. It wasn't necessarily the term I wanted. So effectively, again, he knew what he wanted. He knew that he wanted a distillery with reasonable capacity. He knew that he wanted a sustainable spirit. He wanted something kind of soft, Speyside element style. Again, that was kind of what was selling back in 2000 as well. That was really that softer, fruitier, lighter style of whiskey was very, very popular. So he kind of looked at it from an objective point of view, and Tomintoul became part of that. And then Glencadam followed in 2003. But even, on the evolutional scale, we've kind of refurbished both of those distilleries, not modernized them really, but we've kind of built onto them. So we've got blending plants at both now because of just industry and demand. We now have a state-of-the-art bottling plant. We have cask storage facilities for about 300,000 casks.
I'm going to start asking you about that because that's obviously all of that stuff, those blending facilities, that cask, that stock. That's going to become your plaything, or it's already your plaything.
Well, yeah. So actually, I've said before. So we were up at Speyside. Obviously, I've not been to the distillery since my new appointment. And was up at Tomintoul doing a kind of virtual tasting. And I remember opening the doors of Warehouse 2, and it's strange because obviously I've been doing that for 5-6 years now when I'm showing customers around. But I have this this really weird kind of tingle of responsibility when I open the doors because I'm like, this is kind of me now. Obviously before I was always talking about it, but now I literally I'm in charge of those casks to a degree if they let me. But I'm like a lot of what's in that warehouse will be my legacy. It'll be what I bring to Angus Dundee, which is pretty cool. Again, I've tried not to let my head expand too largely, but
no, but it's that thing. You've been forced to switch your perspective now. These aren't just some incidental casks that exist. These are now your responsibility. It's under your guardianship now. So that's quite there is a responsibility that comes with it. Yeah.
Well, even at Coatbridge, so a bottling plant, it's primarily a blending plant. So that's where we keep a lot of our younger malts and grains and things. But that's where my office is based, and I always park outside the warehouses. And again, it's an amazing smell to get out in the morning. But again, there's this kind of strange thing that whereas before I was like, oh well, that's a warehouse full of grain. But now I'm like, oh, that's a warehouse full of grain that I'll be playing with at some point. Playing with is the kind of my non-adult term of talking about how to blend whiskey. But,
sure. We understand that you can talk about it seriously as you like, but we know that on certain days on good days you will be able to literally play. Eric Cunliffe is saying Ralphie very recently evangelized Glencadam. He did absolutely, stating that we should be buying now and that the core range is the best out there compared to indie offerings. Curious on both your thoughts. We're going to touch on that. We know what Iain's going to say about it, but obviously, I mean, you guys know that I've been doing my bit for evangelizing about the Glencadam range specifically. And you know, at least one product's from the Tomintoul range that we're going to touch on in a wee minute. Whiskey Influencer Tim is saying the world whiskey is always challenging me to keep up with it. Absolutely, Tim. The key, except that we can't have everything new and jump in of the new whiskey stream at a pace we can handle. That's right. And I think it's okay if you've got the finance and if you've got the space to go and over accumulate and do what I do. I know that I'm doing it. I've got an excuse that I channel and things, but the reality is I'm over accumulating. But it's because I'm impassioned and I'm connected and I don't want to miss out on a lot of products. And I'm also kind of slightly nervous that some of it might slip out of reach, not just on because of availability, but because of price or because of the end discontinued and things. Shale at Whiskey Central is saying, very serious question. Is Iain seriously a world cheese eating champion? I was going to spring that on you. Let's dwell on that for a second. Let's ask it.
So
just one or two more. Sorry, Ben
no problem.
Requested you to join, and all of our other barflies on Facebook. Thank you. Fantastic. And playing with whiskey, count me in. Absolutely, Luna. We would love to be all able to play with whiskey now and again. Before I ask you about the cheese, what's in the glass, Iain?
So in the glass, because I think it's always good to give a nod, as you say, to other industry. I think the great thing about the whiskey industry is that we're all friends. So I'm drinking something that I was recently put onto by Scott Grierson over at Distell, and it's my local distillery, which is a Deanston Marsala finish 15-year-old. I thought I'd try something a bit different.
Superb. I think, is that Marsala finish, is that a 46 or is that a cask-strength one?
Cask-strength.
Cask-strength one,
55 and a half. But yeah, it was Scott that put me onto it. It was actually, we had a great tasting that it was Distell versus Angus Dundee, not against each other as such, but he did 4 and I did 4. And at the end of it, we both kind of got together because, again, I've not seen Scott for ages. And we're both having a chat and I was like, oh, this is great stuff. And he's like, oh, yeah, you've got some really great stuff too. And I was like, what would you recommend? And I say the Marsala finish. Like, oh, cool! I'd love to play with some more Marsala on our side. So
Deanston is absolutely one of my favourites. There's been some chatter recently that Heineken are interested,
really,
and that's making a lot of people a wee bit nervous. Yes, have you not heard that Heineken are interested in Distell? So
it's something that, to be honest, I think when it's on your doorstep, there's two things that happen. I'm fortunate in my job that I get to play with great whiskey. I'll stop saying play because it doesn't sound very professional, but I get to kind of experience and taste some amazing stuff. Some stuff that if I was 10 years younger, I would have to literally pinch myself to understand what I was doing. And I think that it's a fortunate position that I'm very grateful for. And if there was more whiskey shows, I'd be bringing you guys some stuff to try as well. I feel bad that we've not had a chance to share any of it yet, but I am keeping some in my garage for the next time there's a whiskey event that we can. I could pour you a little sample of something special.
Listen, we don't. I know that you guys are doing so much virtually in the last year or so, but there's no doubt that you're no different from anybody else. Everybody's got this pent up desire to get back out there and to get sharing products. The whiskey distillation has been continued. The maturation has been busy in the background doing what it's always doing. So it's going to be interesting to see how everything goes going forward. And Simon Ray is shouting, "Hands off, Heineken." We're all a wee bit, and that's the thing is we do. It's not our whiskey, Iain. So if I get offended at something that Angus Dundee does to the presentation of a product or the price, we always have to check ourselves. I don't own it. But I invest time and money and emotion and passion and knowledge and I invest a lot of time into the product. And when it does change direction or we sometimes feel a wee bit betrayed, like it's taken away, I think it's natural to react in that way. I mean, it's not rational necessarily, but
it makes sense.
It's a natural human thing. And I think that's what's happening when we hear stories like that. We were very nervous about Brown-Forman, and we were actually quite encouraged that for a long time the Brown-Forman thing seemed to be going quite well. We didn't want to kind of... And then suddenly we hear that there's been some changes at Glendronach, which seems to be against a lot of the other changes that's happening in the industry that we'll touch upon. But now I need to ask you, what's the cheese eating thing that Sheila was talking about?
So the cheese eating thing is... For those that don't know me, I don't really like to take myself too seriously. I know that I'm good at what I do, and that's as far as I kind of blow my own trumpet. But I hate writing CVs. I hate writing bios for myself, because I think that saying I'm fantastic and I'm great and this is all the things I'm good at, it doesn't really do it for me. I'd rather hear other people's stories. I'd rather hear what other people have experienced than me talk about myself. Obviously, kind of tonight we'll talk about experiences, but I'd rather tell you funny stories rather than that. So I was told to write a bio a few years ago. And I was like, do you know what? I'm going to make this deliberately silly. So I was like, I think I said like international raconteur, kind of man of mystery, and world cheese eating champion. And then I said, this is all things that Iain would use to describe himself, and will do so again as a joke. But this came up because I did an interview for Whiskey Magazine in Taiwan, and I had a translator there, and I was sitting doing a chat with him. And the guy was asking questions, and he was like, so kind of, when did you join the industry? How long have you worked for Angus Dundee? And then he said something, and obviously translated, and he's like, and he was waiting, and the guy's like, what year were you world cheese eating champion? I was like, oh, no. I was like, that's a joke. And he didn't find it funny at all, because he was a journalist, he prepped his questions, he was like, why would you joke about that? And I was like, it's just not, I just said it to be funny. And he's like, it's not funny. Okay. So yeah, the world cheese eating champion is a joke. If anyone read it in Whiskey Magazine, I do apologize. I should have just made something up. I'm like, yeah, I've eaten kind of 300 baby bells in 20 minutes. But no, I literally...
But it's kind of funny how you do these kind of tongue-in-cheek things and they come round and bite you in the backside. Exactly. I was under the impression, is it not still your Twitter profile?
Is it? Oh, maybe it is. I don't
know.
So I'm not good at keeping on top of Twitter. People are too angry on Twitter. I think that's the problem. Not that they're not angry anywhere else, but Twitter's kind of been left behind personally. But yeah.
I'm just going to check, because I had read it and it was a while ago. No, it's not. It doesn't say here, but I read it somewhere, and because I knew you were coming on, I said, "Oh, I've got to pick him up on that." So it's going to be interesting. I wonder where Shayla picked it up or where she read it.
It was literally so it was me being uncomfortable with trying to brag about myself. Because I remember doing the bio, and they're like, right, okay, and I was like, how do you want me to do it? And I write it in the third person. I'm like, okay, so Iain's amazing. Arguably the handsomest man in the industry, all this kind of crap. And I was like, nah, I'll just be a bit silly with it.
International man of mystery, raconteur, and cheese eating champion. That's as good as any CV.
Yeah, I thought it was.
You would get a job behind this, Barry, and with that CV, absolutely. Mamuka 1977 has bought me a dram as well. Not saying anything, just very grateful to have the dram. If you get any comments or whatever, you can add that in there. But cheers to you. Thanks for the dram. This is interesting because on Sunday night's stream, it was a patron stream. I was trying cognac, and I was going through some cognacs from Jason Bradford. And the Glencadam that I've got here in front of me was, you sent me along some new make to try, but you also sent me along some of this from, I guess, your stash. And it's a cognac. I haven't seen this. Is this a release? Is this a genuine thing?
Brand new. But unfortunately, so loved that it disappeared really quickly. We actually, so the short story of this was that Glencadam, we don't do allocations. We don't do the Springbank thing. We don't pre-sell it and sell it off in small batches. But for this, we released it because it's a new cask finish for us. It's one of the projects I've kind of overseen in my time at Angus Dundee.
So this is an Iain Forteath product.
The reason I sent you it is, although I don't necessarily like to talk about myself in a bio, I thought I'd send you the stuff I could do. But yeah, so this one is a product that I made, but it's also something I really enjoy. It's something quite different. I've got to switch to this one here. But we released this and we sold it out in the UK in a week and a half. The reason for that is our importers, primarily in Taiwan and Germany, took loads of it. They were really interested in it. And yeah, it disappeared. The good news, and again, this is not a sales pitch, because again, those of you that don't know me, I'm not that salesy really. I'm more a geek on why it's made and tastes that way than the kind of, oh yeah, that lovely natural water and all that stuff. So
I was just about to say, you have to, if you've said, you have to follow up by saying there's more on the way. Surely that's what's coming.
Well, yeah. So the good news is there seems to be 30 cases that were accidentally UK duty stamped. So there might be some more available. I don't know how commercial that is to say on screen, but the good news is there might be some more.
Well, to me, I think it's obvious that the cognac thing in here is obvious, but I would never have picked it out. And I'm very grateful to Jason and those wee samples he gave me of cognac from the weekend because of the notes. And Jason, you'll be very happy to see that I've been enjoying these. I've actually got through these. This is the only one I have left out of the 3 that you sent me, Jason. I have been enjoying it, and I think it's nice to switch it up and contrast your whiskey journey a little bit with other spirits. Maybe to reinforce you and reassure yourself that you're on the right track already or whatever, but it also kind of expands your palate, it expands that kind of experience, that library that you have. And for me, what I got on this was that I talked to you about that kind of really quite white, clean note that I've sometimes I go in and it's a wee bit kind of gooseberry, it's very dry, but I wonder if that's the cognac thing. And I know what you've actually sent me here, and the reason that you sent me something is because we were getting our geek on talking about this, you wanted to send me new make of the Tomintoul and new make of the Glencadam.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and you're up for some questions here. I ask everybody these questions, and I know they can be a bit crunchy. These are 68% and 68.1 on the Tomintoul. These are high ABV. Obviously, this is not fill strength; it's still strength.
Yeah.
So what we've got here, I've put a lot of water in the glass, and I've put a wee coin on top to cover them up here, just to leave them for a while. But here we've got something that's in the high 60s. And when we buy when we see most of the Tomintoul, most of it is 40% presentation, right? So we're speaking about that kind of that ABV being the greatest barrier of enjoyment or whatever it may be. 40% presentation. That's just about as strong as a lot of markets are going to stand. Thank you very much. We understand, but we've moved on from that. And then Glencadam, I've touched upon it before. When we talk about the concept of malt and it's evolving, to me as a whiskey geek, in my whiskey geek bubble, the only way I can tolerate, enjoy, get excited, or see the evolution of the whiskey going forward is that kind of more natural presentation. We're carrying all this information in our pocket. The boom of the internet is amazing. We can find out anything in a heartbeat. So, Iain, I'm going to ask you, why does Tomintoul exist at its presentation? And why is Glencadam out there doing what it's doing? And why are there some expressions, such as that 14-year-old you held up there, that's taken it a wee bit off-piste for Tomintoul? How important is potentially natural presentation to you?
It's a funny one. So Tomintoul, I suppose, part of it's when it was established. So Tomintoul was designed to be our bigger product. The distillery, as it happened when we took Glencadam, is 3 times the size of Glencadam pretty much in terms of capacity. And it is our bigger brand internationally. And I suppose the traditional element of it was that it's in terms of consistency. So 40% chill filtration, a little bit of caramel colouring. There's not loads of it, but I know that's a terrible word. But at the same time, so 2 things I'll say. Firstly, number one, I'll be really honest with you because I think it's better to do that than kind of pretend, oh yeah, it's really dark and lovely and that's why it's that colour. So we do use caramel colouring because chill filtration removes colour. We don't use lots. It's one of these things that we do almost colour replacement. We do measures before and after. Our kind of CUs, colour units that you measure Tomintoul at, is only varying about kind of 4 or 5 points.
And just to pause for a second there, and I'll let you continue, because you accept that it's going to remove certain things. That's exactly why you're doing the chill filtration. And we know that it's not a digital thing. You know, there's not chill filtration or not chill filtration. There's lots of gradients in between of levels of it. But just you saying those words, chill filtration removes colour. It takes some colour out. So why would a producer be interested in doing it? Why would anyone chill filter?
Product stability, I think, is traditional. So it's mainly if you're exporting, so it won't fluctuate with things like heat exposure, or if you add ice or water when it ends to the kind of consumer's glass. So if you're shipping it out to a really hot country, for example, or a really cold country, and the whiskey temperature spikes, you can get flock, you can get precipitation. That's not a bad thing. It just looks weird. And I think that whereas the European market is more developed, is more advanced, I suppose, now. And again, that's not a disrespect, because places like America are really catching up now.
No, if the facts are the facts. We don't. It's not anything we're controlling or devising. It's just the nature of it. Yeah.
I'm not saying any market's inferior, but there's different markets that have different perceptions of whiskey still. And I think for us, because Tomintoul is still quite a big export brand for us, doing it at 40 keeps the whiskey stable. It means that every bottle the customer's going to buy is going to be the same. There's not going to be any fluctuation in terms of flavour. There's not going to be any fluctuation in terms of colour being different batch to batch, because it's gone through that process.
So where mass market is an ugly term, then that's a bit of a blunt instrument way of describing it. But let's go with maybe the market that is, as I described, somebody that's going to buy a bottle
Yeah.
They're going to enjoy it. They're going to drain it and then go out and replace it with the exact same bottle again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are not really thinking about the fact that it's an organic product produced in a fairly natural, traditional, hundreds-of-year-olds method, and then matured inside another organic product. They're not thinking about all of these things. They just want it to be that reliable, consistent product.
Yeah, I think on a global scale,
because they're detached, they're loving it, but they've just not got their geek on. They're not enthusiasts.
Yeah, because I kind of see it from both hats. As a whiskey geek, if I could do everything cask strength, I would, just because it's fun to kind of look into it that way. I think that it's different markets. So there's still lots of markets where darker spirits are seen as better. And again, we don't go crazy on the colouring. There's some that do. I'm not passing the buck. But there's still markets like cognac and rum where caramel colouring is a massive part of what they do. And I think that in those markets, they still expect dark spirits. Bourbon, by design, is a very dark spirit. So again, if you hold up a 10-year-old Scotch against a 3-year-old bourbon, one will be dark and one won't. And again, it's not necessarily a case of saying that's necessarily the right way, but it's the kind of traditional way it's been. So Tomintoul, part of its consistency. Part of it's also that the distilleries kind of fondly become known as the gentle dram. And this is good, but also kind of constricting to a degree, because people know Tomintoul to be a kind of sweet, nutty, rounded spirit. If you pump up the ABV on that, it might not be as gentle as people are expecting. That doesn't necessarily mean it should be that way forever, but it is something that the kind of core range in Tomintoul is 40%. So a 10-year-old, 16-year-old, and 21 follow that pattern because they're that kind of softer, lighter, sweeter, nutty style. I don't think it necessarily is detriment to everything in the range, and I would say that. So when I was working in whiskey retail, I was very much pushing everything that was non-chill filtered natural colour. That's how I fell in love with Glencadam. It would be fair to say that I really love Tomintoul 16. I drink it all the time. It's probably the whiskey I drink the most of everything we make, even though it's 40%. Because I don't really think it lacks a lot. I think it's a great spirit for that kind of price point and for that kind of what you design it for. It's a really rounded, textured dram. But like I said, we're kind of fortunate in Angus Dundee that we kind of do both things. So Tomintoul is graduating towards a bit of both. There's literally drams in our range for everybody. The core range is 40%. All of the finishes going forward are going to be 46. That's an Iain Forteath for you. But there are whiskies in the range like the 14-year-olds, which offers you that element, and the kind of cask finish.
I need you to repeat that again.
Yeah.
Slowly.
So our cask finishes in Tomintoul, so like special editions and things, are going to be at 46.
Okay, so has the 14-year-old, was that genuinely a toe in the water then, just to see how it would be received?
It was actually, the 14's been in the range for a while, but it was there to be a bit of both. So effectively, people that want a Tomintoul with a bit more age, but not necessarily something in the kind of top end, kind of love the 16, but they wanted to see both ends of it. So the 14 is built in a similar profile. It's released as a 14 rather than a 16 because releasing two products of the same age of a similar cask type is not really a kind of sensible step on top. So it's kind of giving people the option. So the 14 is like a thicker, oilier, creamier version of the 16. You get that more viscosity, and it has the different congeners and things that you don't lose to chill filtration.
Yeah,
it's a funny one. I'm not defending it as such, but I think that from my perspective, I joined Angus Dundee under the vision of, everything should be non-chill filtered, everything should be natural colour, and I think it's right in the right market, and I think that it's good to have. I think it's a healthy for whiskey geeks and things like that. I think it's a great way to understand your whiskey more. But I kind of see the place for it. And again, having worked with Tomintoul for the last kind of 5 years, I understand why they chill filter the core range. I don't know if it would necessarily be my choice. Like I said, I'd do everything at cask strength if I could. But there's the kind of, it fits the gap for Tomintoul. So Tomintoul is a rounded, sweet, soft dram. For those of you tuning in, if you've not tried it, kind of don't let the fact it's 40 put you off. But at the same time, if you're more interested in something with a bit more strength, with the non-chill filtered aspect to it, there's whiskies in there as well. So I think the flip side of it is that the markets that are a bit more advanced in terms of their whiskey understanding are sometimes flippant of Tomintoul because they're like, oh well, they do everything at 40, which isn't the case. But I know that.
Well, I think there are distilleries out there that I use examples of lots, Glengoyne, Tomatin, others that they've got product out there that are mass market, let's say, and I know it's a clunky, ugly way to do it, but they're out there at a lower ABV, and they're also competing for price point. They're on a shelf, and they've kind of got to be at the right price too. And there's a place for it. And let's be honest, you're preaching to the converted. Number one, not everybody wants to drink cask strength or high ABV whiskies all the time. Sometimes you just want to relax with friends and have something soft, especially at the start of the evening. And number two, if you were offered the 2 drams side by side, blind, would you really step up and say, yes, I'll get it every time, if the strength is the same, if they've been reduced to the same strength? And I think we all know instinctively that sometimes our palate can pick it up and other times not so much. So you know, I don't want to go around, you know, I understand that these things exist. But I also think that malt is a wee bit precious. I think it's a precious thing. And if I'm nosing your 2 whiskies here, left and right, this is a Glencadam and this is a Tomintoul, I don't envy you your job, because the differences for me and my inexperienced palate is that these are very, very similar. However, I think that this is a wee bit more fruity and porridgey. And this one has more of, it's interesting because you suggested that this might be the thing I get the pear drops on, but it's the Glencadam that's getting that kind of apple and pear orchard thing. And what's amazing about being able to do this and knows these new makes is that when you're able to taste the finished product, the bottled whiskey, you're then able to determine that some of the flavors have come from distillation or the grain or the mash or the fermentation, whatever it may be, versus the cask. And I think what you talked about there when you talk about cask finishes, that's pointing to people that are interested in chasing the flavor. So that makes sense to me why you would suddenly want to kind of bump that up and have cask finishes at a higher ABV. Graham Fraser is asking, any updates on the Glencadam's visitor centre? I've been waiting 30 years for a visit. Graham Fraser must have visited pretty much every distillery that there is. He's amazing. He's got the photo collection that he shares on the Barflies page on Facebook is amazing. And he's given me photos to use for the quiz. And things. He's a real journeyman, and he shares a lot of information. So we'll ask that in a second. And there's another question for you here from Simon Ray saying, I once did a fantastic cheese and Balvenie tasting, but what cheeses would Iain suggest go with the Glencadam core range?
So I have a pretty mean cheese selection to pick from. Although I'm not a cheese eating champion, I do quite enjoy cheese. I remember doing a great tasting where effectively I went over to Iain Mellis and got samples of about 25 different cheeses and tried to find pairings for each of our range. If you want, I can send you the list if that's easier. But as core range,
Iain Forteath is going to share a cheese pairing list.
I'm very happy.
Based on his status as the world's cheese eating champion.
It's one of these things, I think. So not to digress, bouncing around, I'm the same as yourself. I like not to have a script. I think it's good to just kind of be organic, and I hope that that's okay with everybody as well, because I will come back to questions. But so I was trained to taste in the wine industry. I learned to kind of train my palate, I suppose, by some really great wine tasters. If any of you ever come to Bridge of Allen, there's a guy called Shane Dunning who effectively kind of taught me a lot of what to learn. Him and Kim are really amazing tasters. And Shane, to a degree that he can literally tell you wines from what vineyard, from what sloping, kind of facing slopes and this kind of stuff. And although I can't profess to that degree in wine tasting, what I found was my nose is a bit better at the blunter stuff. So I trained my palate, but actually spirits have always been something that I've really gotten into. And so I really love whiskies, cognacs, bourbons, kind of rums, Calvados, you name it. And I think that, but the big thing in the wine side of things, and again, food pairing is quite a recent thing in whiskey. Again, that's kind of been part of it's been happening while I've been in whiskey. It's not like it's a really dated thing, but whiskey is really versatile, and you can use it for all sorts of things. So something that I've always tried to do in my tastings is incorporate food, because actually kind of they do it all the time with wines, and so if you get the right food and the right wine, you put them together, it becomes this whole other thing. And it's the same if you get the right whiskey pairings. And yeah, it's something that so I'd happily share my cheese list at some point, or we could do a cheese tasting at some point. But
aye, perfect. And Graham Fraser, obviously, he's keen to know what's happening with the visitor centre, because I heard it was planned in development, right?
Yeah, so two things to point out, I suppose, for us. So Angus and Dundee, generally, we'd love you to come and see us if you can. We're not open at the weekends at the moment because we're full production distilleries. But if you are in the area, obviously when COVID, kind of depending on the situation, do let me know. I'm quite happy to share my email address with Roy if you're interested. All I'd say is let us know if you're coming up and we'll try to fit you in. You won't be shown around by a student in a kilt. You'll get shown around by our master distiller or distillery manager, people that make it every day. So if you are up in the area, do let us know. We'll try our best. We can't promise it because obviously it depends what our staff are doing at the time. With Glencadam itself, it's a distillery with almost 200 years of history. And we always felt that it needed a bit of a nod to that. We're not going to build a big industrial style visitor centre. It's not going to be the new Macallan. It's going to be more subtle. It's going to be fitted to the size. It's not a big distillery, so we can't take big coach loads of people. But it's also kind of heart to the history because actually kind of Dundee and Perth and that kind of Angus region is an area that was kind of rich in whiskey history once that's kind of been left behind a bit. As Speyside has become what it is, Dundee and Perth were massive blending cities back in the day. A lot of the reason that Scotch is the size that it is now is because of grocers in Dundee and Perth. But all that's kind of been forgotten because there's not really any distilleries in Dundee and Perth anymore. So part of that visitor centre experience is to kind of give a nod to the area. Glencadam's kind of been there through a lot of that. We obviously had some pretty famous neighbours like Northport and Lochside and these kind of guys that, again, have fallen by the wayside. So it's going to be a kind of nod to the history of the area. The reason that Angus was always a distilling region is because it's got loads of fertile farmland and great kind of. They actually get some sunshine on the east coast, and yeah, it's good for growing barley as well. So it's got a kind of interesting edge. So yeah, the reason we decided to build a visitor centre is to give that kind of nod to kind of recognise the fact that it's a distillery that's almost 200 years old. And although it doesn't have the bells and whistles of people like Macallan and Glenlivet who are of a similar age, it's still there, and it makes pretty good whiskey. So it's kind of a case of showing it off a little bit.
It remains the prime example. It's interesting that you've got a distillery visitor centre now. That's amazing, because I think it's difficult to find a distillery in the Scotch whisky production landscape that is more stealth than Glencadam.
It is pretty hard to, it's
because it's 1825, right?
Yeah.
And it's never been up here and it's never been down there. It's just always kind of done that thing.
Yeah, which is quite incredible, really. I think that I have a real soft spot for Glencadam. I loved the spirit before I joined the company. It was a spirit I sold quite a lot of. I used to sell the 15-year-old by the bucket loads because I used to use it as an alternative to sherry bomb fans. I think that it doesn't have any sherry in it whatsoever, but it's a big full-on whiskey. And I used to use it as a converter for people that all they could see was sherry. Not that there's anything wrong with sherry casks, but
sure, I understand.
The right distillery. So I sold it for years. I loved it. And then they kind of asked if I'd be interested in applying to work for them. But I'd never been to the distillery until I joined the company. And yeah, it's a little distillery that's tucked away at the back of Brecon. The town's kind of evolved around it. And yeah, it's got a real cool little kind of position in whiskey as well. It's funny because if you speak to the right people that know it tend to love it, but lots of people have never heard of it. And it's been quite a fun part of my job as well, really. I've never worked for the big companies. I've got lots of friends.
I think even the packaging is quite
understated.
Absolutely very modest, kind of very generic, kind of almost. This packaging could be from any era, any time. You could look at this. And there's some Victorian elements in here. There's some kind of post-war stuff. There's 60s, 70s, 80s even. And then you look a wee bit closer and you see things like I think it's wonderful. Even on this one I've just poured, a shout out to Stefan Novak who sent this to me, gifted this to me. Stefan, I've just uncorked it tonight. I'm going to try it with Iain now. But even on this one here, and I'll ask you about this in a second, it says unchill filtered, no added colouring. And that seems to be right across the range, although you do have a knowledge statement entry-level origin product that's slightly different, we understand. But this is the one that Ralphie recently, he reviewed it and raved about it very, very, very recently and gave 88 points. And now he's sitting there, you could see how happy he was on the review that he just went out this week. And that must be wonderful for you to hear, because he said that, no, I'm going to give it more. And in the context of everything else it's up against, it deserves more because it's just an amazing. The last two bottles of this, Iain, because of how much I'm sharing it, because of how much I'm enjoying it, I've torn through. This is just an absolute belter of a product. Cheers. And that does not mean that you have the right to go out and suddenly
pump the price up. No.
Just this is the kind of thing that you stand and you say, look, see, while all of these brands are going out of reach,
Yeah,
we've got these anchors here available, and that's kind of why I want to celebrate it. But look at this one here, the one I've just opened from Stefan.
yeah.
Stefan has never sent me anything other than something interesting, so I'm curious about this.
I'll join you for a dram. So this is an Iain Forteath special as well, actually.
Which is your product? Good, fantastic.
So interestingly, so although my new position is quite recent, just of January this year was the kind of discussion of it, and effectively from March, it's been my new post. I have been blending with Angus Dundee for about 3 years, but on almost more of a backseat. So working with our other blender, working with Robert, and that element of things. So I suppose it was maybe I've just been allowed to take off my training wheels. Let's get the stabilizers off. Hopefully it stays stable. But no, there's projects that I've kind of overseen, and there's a few things I could put my name to before. The most recent batch of Glencadam 15 was myself, in terms of the kind of recreation of Glencadam 15 after that 3-year hiatus, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And this was designed to be kind of, so Origins is loved by some and not by others, Glencadam Origin, because that's our kind of first step in the ladder. But we did it at 40, and I think that although it's great as a kind of a malt in that price range, we actually thought we'd rather show off the sherry element better in an NAS, but with something that's a higher ABV. So this is non-chill filtered natural colour, and it's Glencadam with a sherry focus. It's not a sherry bomb.
No, that's my first feedback to you is that it says Andalucía or Reserva Andalucía on the label.
Yeah.
Oloroso sherry cask finish.
Yeah.
And I think the colour kind of gives it away. It's got a rich colour to it. It's very copper coloured. But on the nose, I would give it to you. There's a wee bit of fig on the nose. There's a wee bit of spice. There's a wee bit of kind of nuttiness to it. But, you know, it's not an overt sherry experience. This is kind of a... It reminds me of a lot of kind of core range product out there where maybe their 10 and their 12-year-old is kind of like 70% bourbon and 30% sherry or something like that.
Yeah. It's funny. So for us, Glencadam isn't a massive spirit. It's got good body to it, but it's not meaty or sulfury, which doesn't give you that body for maturing in loads of sherry. So although we could bung it in a sherry butt for all its life and see how it comes out, Glencadam, for us, I think as well, for the size of production we do, we kind of want people to know it's Glencadam, and I think the Andalucía does that. It's not pretending to be a big sherry bomb. It's Glencadam with some nice Oloroso influence. Why is
the age statement dropped from this then?
Because it's some younger casks. So we could have called it a 6-year-old, but it doesn't really sound that exciting. So this one is some younger, fully matured Glencadam in Oloroso with some slightly older finished Glencadam in Oloroso. So it's showing off some of that youthful spirit character, and with the kind of the Oloroso influence without it being a kind of a knock your head off stuff product.
Well, so, I know what you're saying about the single digit age statements and things like that. I think if we talk about malt whiskey's evolution, we could talk about that a wee bit as well. Yeah, and I think this is very common practice for this style of whiskey for it to lose the age statement, especially when it's going alongside the shelf, along something else. Yeah. But I think the industry is starting to become a bit more confident now about those single digit age statements. We're starting to see them in a lot of places.
It's
I would encourage, but having said that, this is an interesting product because if I understand well, it's not expensive, right?
No, it's designed to be an approachable one. I think the reason behind it to a degree as well is that we do a 19-year-old Glencadam Oloroso, which is finished for 6 years now, sherry butts. It's awesome, but it costs over 100 quid. So the reason for this was to give something that's the same sort of price point as the 10, non-chill filtered, natural colour, that gives you a bit of a sherry influence to Glencadam. So it's not super young, but it's not, the age range in it is diverse enough that to just stick the youngest bottle on wouldn't really do it justice. So it's a kind of nice mix. I know what the comments are going to say. It's okay, we're not going to switch everything to non-age statement. That's not our plan. There might be a couple non-age statement releases from time to time, but we have age stock at Glencadam. We have kind of age statements that we know and love very well, like the 10-year-old that we're not going to suddenly replace. Again, every company does it differently, but don't panic. The reason this one is the way it is, as I say, is because the single-digit age statement is maybe just not being based by us yet. Give it time.
The enthusiasts out there will look at something like this and they'll make that assumption anyway. they'll make the assumption you're talking 6, 7, 8 years old. And it does become the point where you suddenly become a wee bit frustrated on one hand that people can't write that. I mean, Reb Mordecai is literally in the chat just now saying, that's what I don't understand. Why are they so ashamed to say it's 6 years old? And I think that it's unfortunately for the Scotch industry over the decades, it's built up this, and it was hammered home during the days of the whiskey loch, right? That the older the whiskey got, it was Taliskers and Lagavulins and all of these single digit age statements of the old days disappeared, and they went up in age. And then suddenly all this kind of kudos came around about this really extreme ages and things, and I think it was a rod for its own back. However, I think that now we're in a situation where I think that it's almost something to celebrate. You give it to somebody and you say, try this whiskey, what do you think? Oh yeah, it's enjoyable. What age do you think it is? Oh, 10 or 12 years old. And then you say, no, it's 6 years old. And it's like, wow. And it's kind of there's almost like a kind of reverse kudos kind of kicking in now.
Yeah, true.
If on that theme of evolution, would you agree, or do you think?
Yeah, I definitely, I know what you mean. I think I'm always surprised to try younger spirits that are really alive and kicking, and they've got loads to offer. I suppose again, it kind of comes as a company generally. Angus and Dundee are quite risk adverse. We have a lot of confidence and pride in our liquids, but they don't do anything too radical. I suppose Tomintoul being that kind of staple ABV is kind of part and parcel of it. We make a spirit that we know is good. That's what we put it out at. I think for us to put a younger age statement on the bottle would be quite a big jump for us to put on like a single digit. Like I say, I'll never say never. I think it would be interesting to see. I think that confidence in people's understanding of Glencadam is getting to a stage that would work. The flip side of that is there's still lots of markets out there that would go, that's a 6-year-old, I'm not drinking it. And I think that it depends on the market, of course. And again, I wouldn't look at a whiskey and go, it's only 6 years old, I'm not drinking it. But some people still might look at, oh, do you know what, I'd rather just buy the 10. Because price-wise, they're about the same. Just because the sherry casks involved are more expensive than the bourbon.
And it is that thing. I agree with you that, it's about education. It's about making people understand why it exists. And it's less to do with the age. 12 years in average casks is not going to be any better than 6 years in good casks.
Exactly.
All things being equal in terms of spirit and things. But I'm sitting here, I've got the Glencadam new make here. It's reduced. I've put a decent amount of water in it, and I'm enjoying it alongside that. That's a special treat. Thank you for that.
No problem at all.
And I'm enjoying it alongside. And obviously, what the wonderful thing you can do is try and pick up what sweet confectionery notes, because that's what I'm getting now. Versus when I go in here, you're getting all that spice and all that. That kind of slightly figgy note. There's lots of kind of toffee caramel and sweeter things, and suddenly you go, okay, there's those sweet notes here. They're not the same as the sweet notes here.
No, they polish off. It's funny. I actually love to try this one in a tasting beside the 10-year-olds, because it really shows you the difference. Because the 10 is all that kind of lovely banana cream kind of. You got the vanilla overdose, and vanilla is obviously a very typical tasting note for a bourbon cask, but it really has that kind of brioche.
But there's 100 different vanillas, right? And it's just...
exactly. So it's got a really lovely kind of crisp character, and I think that for us, we always want Glencadam to taste like Glencadam. So we don't do sherry bombs. I could give you a sherry bomb from Glencadam. It's not really. It wouldn't do the distillery any justice. It would just taste like sherry.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I would be very tempted to do exactly what you've just suggested and open up that 10-year-old. But people have heard me evangelize from the rooftops for a year now or more about the 10-year-old. I'm going to kind of give people a wee bit of. I know you've touched on it ever so slightly, but at your recommendation, based on our discussion, you've gone back to your whiskey retail roots and you've listened to my voice, and you've said, "Have you tried the 18-year-old, Roy?" And I said, "No, I haven't." Yeah. Well, it's maybe it sounds like one that you would like, because when I talked about that whiskey that's been left alone, refill casks, or what they might have referred to back in the old days as distillery wood, right? Before we learned to talk about the difference between American oak and European oak, and what the previous incumbent was, whether it was whiskey or something else as a first fill, when you've got that, I think that's what Scotch has got. That while it's not unique, it's the strength. That quiet cold climate, that quiet interactivity between the wood and the liquid, allowing the environment and time and all of these things to have a play in it as well. And I did an entire vPub on the topic of what is the perfect optimal age statement for Scotch. Ridiculous, I know, because everything's different. But isn't it uncanny how we always end up settling on a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old?
True.
That seems to be where that kind of peak happens in Scotch. And here we have a Glencadam at 18 years old, but I've got a crunchy question for you, Iain.
Yeah.
The distillery was closed 18 years ago. What's going on?
Yeah. So the reason I said you should grab this while you can is because we don't have any at the moment. So Glencadam 18, there's still some in the shops. We just don't have any to sell. So there's a 3-year closure gap in Glencadam. So between 2000 to 2003.
So that's what happened to the 15-year-old right after Ralphie gave it his Whiskey of the Year.
It is indeed, yeah. So actually I spent 6 months telling everyone it was out of stock just afterwards. Because obviously Ralphie gave Glencadam the accolade. It was amazing for us, really great recognition for a spirit that we really, really love. But the problem was we didn't have any 15-year-old left. So spent that time. And it's funny because we'd established Glencadam's DNA from stock that we bought with the distillery. So there's a 3-year production gap. We took it over in 2003. Obviously tasted through what we had and we decided what the Glencadam style was. We kind of made up whiskies using parcels that we had to be like, yeah, this is what we're going to use as Glencadam's signature. Obviously, everything post 2003 has been our stock. It's things that we have recreated, I suppose, in that element. We've created new releases as well. I don't want to talk over you drinking this because I think you're going to quite like it. But this, and then so there's a bit of both. And this is Glencadam from this is Allied Domecq produced stuff.
So this is last century. This is
pre-2000 as it's talking about. I'm going to pour a dram as well, so I can join you for one. But
so this is incredible. Okay, let me start off with the only comment that could in any way be interpreted as a negative, and it's not a negative.
Yeah.
So the nose and everything, my heart went all aflutter and things and everything in the nose. I've just uncorked this tonight, so if we talk about that scenario of it being not being given any time in the glass, it's a neck pour, okay? But the nose was there. So I've got this lovely white, bright fruit. I've got this lovely kind of barley sugar, the sweetness, this lovely vanilla, but it's a kind of aromatic vanilla. This is a maturity. It's difficult to articulate the difference between those notes in a younger whiskey, but there's a maturity to this. But what got me excited was that this is reminiscent of a Clynelish. So that kind of I've sipped it. It doesn't have the waxiness on the nose. It doesn't have much of the waxiness on the palate, but there's a hint of it there. And what is definitely there and 100% intact is the thing I love about this style of whiskey. The cask has had the quietest, laziest time over the years.
Yeah.
And you know what has gone from here, that kind of rawness, that kind of jagginess, that kind of super sweet icing sugar, sweet elements, the confectionery side of the new make.
Yeah.
And here, everything is complex and integrated in together. And it's just that perfect. It's difficult to articulate. It's that perfect 16, 17, 18-year-old age statement.
Yeah.
Of just wonderfully honest, straight whiskey. Now, this wasn't cheap. But it is 18 years old. We have to remember that. I think I paid £78 for this.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of it out there, as you say. This is going to disappear because of that gap. Is that not the same on the 19-year-old Oloroso then? Surely.
Yes. So the 17-year-old Portwood, 18-year-old, and 19-year-old Oloroso are all out at the moment. It will it'll eventually affect our 21 as well. It's one of these things we literally can't do anything about. It's the only frustration of buying a distillery that has a production gap. So yeah, it's very much we're kind of at the mercy of what we have. The good news is we have good liquids at different ages. But I'm loving the expressions you're pulling while drinking that dram. I think I thought you were
this is the perfect example of a whiskey that if you were bringing someone into whiskey, you would be nervous about pouring this for them because you've had a chance for your palate to tune into more subtle things like maturity or like. It could wow them. It could get them excited. They could genuinely enjoy it. And I'm getting a lovely cream now. It's like it's almost like peach melba kind of creamy thing. And I think that you would pour this for them, but you would. I know it's a terrible thing to say. This is not a beginner's whiskey.
Yeah,
that's a rude thing to say, but I think this would be really celebrated by somebody who's had their time to get their head round and their palate around a few whiskies, and then they'd work out what a treat this is. And this is unique to Scotch, Iain. There is not a country on the planet that can provide you this maturity, this complexity, this style of whiskey for £78.
Yeah,
nobody else can do it.
It's one of these things. I think that you're totally right. It's very Glencadam, but at the same time, it's not a blow your head off 18-year-old. It's not a big, massive slap you around the face style of dram. Which, don't get me wrong, I enjoy those.
It's a wizened version of this.
It is indeed, yeah. So it's got polishing and it's got roundness that comes from extra maturation and time for that spirit to soften and really take on the wood without having a cask that's going to overpower it. And within our core range, like I said, so we kind of touched on it briefly. The whole core range of Glencadam's 46 non-chill filtered natural color. There's origin at the beginning. Everything after that is built on that standard. And again, for a distillery of the size of what we have, we kind of want to give it that Glencadam impression. We want to make sure that people know that they're drinking Glencadam. The new make spirit of Glencadam is really tangy, pineapple juice, all that kind of that zinginess really comes alive when you put it in a cask for a long time and it changes. So instead of being like tropical fruits, when it gets to that sort of age, it becomes more of that kind of stone fruit. You get peaches and apricots and that kind of thing.
Aye.
It's funny because we have the four main releases in the Glencadam range are the 10, 15, 18, and 21. Now, the 10 and the 18 are more delicate, more spirit-focused. They let the kind of liquid do the talking. There's a little bit more BB1 on the 10 to give it that bit of fleshiness to it. But with the 15 and the 15 and the 21, they're much more cask-focused. So they've got a lot more of a big kind of bourbon waft to it. They've got lots of kind of spice and richness. So although the 18 and the 21 are only 3 years apart, they're totally different spirits.
I've already been on, and I raved about this because I paid £99 for a 21-year-old naturally presented whiskey. So I know you talk about this. You say the 21's becoming more expensive, and I have to commend you for that because it tells me that you're very mindful of the price thing. And as soon as you approach and break that £100, that triple figure barrier, you know that you're narrowing down your customer base quite a bit. And you're a couple of times you've mentioned the 19-year-old 6 years in Oloroso finish.
Yeah.
And you talk about that. I looked at it, it was £111 when I bought the 18, and I was like, which one should I get? Because I'm not going to be able to buy these forever. I've got millions of sherried whiskies about just now.
Yeah.
And I wanted a more kind of cleaner, my style of whiskey. Yeah. I was worried that I'd put a bit more pressure on this whiskey than it deserved, but it's delivered.
Nice.
Sorry if you're going to expect to put this to your palate and based on my reaction, say a Clynelish, because that would be a mistake. However, there are similarities there. So if you've got to love Clynelish over the years, and Clynelish from an Indy or from an ex-bourbon cask, from a refill cask, with a bit of maturity about it, you know the experience that I'm talking about. That's what taught me to enjoy this style of whiskey.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have that kind of white wax thing that Clynelish has, and it doesn't have the slightly, it's a horrible note, but it's true, sometimes a wee bit kind of farmy, earthy note that Clynelish can have as well. But what it does have is it has all the stone fruit and the peach, it has the barley sugar thing, it has, and the general profile and style is very similar to that. If you were enjoying that style of quiet whiskey, I think you'll absolutely adore this.
Yeah, it's kind of a sit yourself on a Chesterfield and stroke your chin for 20 minutes kind of dram. It's definitely a whiskey that, I mean, the more you get it opened up and the more you let it breathe, it becomes very elegant. And I always think that transition of spirit is beautiful when you can get something that's 18 years old and it's still really fresh on the fruits. I think it's really pretty. And even our 25 kind of follows suit of the 18. If you're lucky enough to ever try one, they are a bit more expensive, but 25 again is like, it's like biting into an apricot. It's got this really lovely kind of fleshy stone fruity note to it, which again,
25 mostly ex-bourbon or refill cask as well.
Yeah, all ex-bourbon. I think there's a couple of seconds and the rest are refill that are in there, so there's no first fill in the 25. and they're done in really tiny batches. So I think it's 1,600 bottles off the top of my head. I think we're maybe on batch 2, similar number, but they're not crazy for 25-year-old. They're about 225 quid, I think.
That's exactly right. It was available when I had a look at the 18. It was there. 225 is. I'm not suggesting that it's expensive for a 25-year-old, but
it's an expensive bottle of whiskey. Yeah, I think
then you're in treat whiskey territory. You're in kind of birthday type whiskey. And
exactly, and I think that it's something that's easy to get carried away with in my position as well. Is that kind of I get to try some great stuff, and when I'm doing tastings, we're showing 21-year-old quite often and things like that. And actually, it's good to see it from that element, but it's also good to see it from a realistic kind of cap to it. I don't drink £100 whiskey every night.
Yep.
I do my job because I love it. I don't do it because I fill a swimming pool with really expensive scotch and go doing the backstroke. But it's one of these things that it's all economies of scale. And one of the things I loved about you saying that Glencadam 10 was a hero whiskey is that I've always said that the same. I think that for under 40 quid, I think that's a brilliant bottle of whiskey. Whether it was my brand or not, I think it gives you pretty much everything you want in a dram.
Well, I think it's quite easy to prove that is you just say to someone, here's £40.
Yeah, give me
go out and buy any whiskey you want, and we'll have them side by side.
Yeah.
And even if you find something that beats it, you're going to know how much effort you're going to have to put in to do that. And I think it's things like that that's testament to it. This is an interesting one because when you're up at this 18-year price bracket, I think there's a lot of the market out there, maybe not us as enthusiasts, but they're looking for something decadent and quite rich and heavy and spiced. And they're kind of going more in a kind of sherry style age. And I've always felt a wee bit sad about that. There was a wonderful Anok available for a few years, the 16-year-old. That was the only one that was exclusively ex-bourbon at that age. And it was just perfect. It was, and obviously because of a stock issue, because of the issues, the challenges they had, that they had to discontinue their 16-year-old. This is very similar. It's that type of product. So if you loved the Anok 16, okay, it doesn't have the minerally thing that the Anok 16 had, but it's that style of whiskey.
Yeah,
I'm very glad to have this, Iain, and I'll let you off the hook for the recommendation.
I know I was a bit riding on it when I was like, oh no. It's one of these things. I think that for myself as well, I love drams that you can really kind of hark back to the distillery, and I think that applies across the board, by the way. And when you were talking about Clynelish, I really like Clynelish as a style, and I think it's a question you get a lot: is like, oh, what's your spirit similar to? And Glencadam's relatively distinctive. I mean, you can never say nothing's the same as anything, but Clynelish is one that gets mentioned a lot. Oban gets thrown in there occasionally as well because of that textural thing. It's not got the saltiness or that kind of brioche note, but there's crossovers. And Glenlossie is the other one that people have kind of thrown around with that kind of fruitiness to it. And they have inclined line arms at Glenlossie, so I wonder whether that's got something to do with it. But it's kind of hard to find something exact. And what I like about Glencadam is the fact that they've done it for 200 years. It's chugged away. The distillery's never expanded in terms of they've never put in additional stills. Even when Domecq kind of increased production at Glencadam, they literally made like-for-like copies of what was there. So they didn't add additional stills, they didn't add additional washbacks, but they just expanded what they had. So much so that we actually have the largest cast iron mash tun, I think. Or no, maybe not the largest, but the last cast iron mash tun that was ever installed, because even though stainless steel was well in its kind of prime and understood in the 80s, Domecq paid to get a cast iron mash tun made in a bigger form of the original.
I think you've been pipped by the boys at Deanston.
Have we been there too? Yeah.
The girls and boys at Deanston, I should say. They've just put in a new mash tun in 2019, maybe 2019, I think.
Cast iron one.
And they replaced it with the exact open top.
Yeah.
Cast iron mash tun. They
maybe not. Okay. I didn't know.
Yeah. Double check that before you go quoting.
Yeah. No, it was. So we were the last ones that New Mill distillers made, who used to do a lot of. So New Mill made a lot of distillery machinery, and literally, I think there was a lot of cussing because they were literally like, you can get a semi-lotter or a full auto mash tun that'll do the same thing and be a lot easier to clean, but they wanted the same thing. But I'll check out Deanston. I didn't know about the open top one.
And I mean, it's nice to see the full outer. It's nice to kind of see that big vessel there. And but I think there's nothing better than hanging over an open top cast iron mash tun and getting the full impact. And you know, especially when the rakes are going and you're just seeing all of this thing happening, and you get before there's any alcohol involved whatsoever, it's just pure grain. Starch, a wee bit kind of, it's kind of difficult to do. So if you've ever walked past a distillery or just been in the vicinity of a distillery, that malty smell that you're getting is the mash, right?
It smells to me that if you've ever had like traditional Scots porridge, so made with salted water, it's got that kind of element to it. It's the stuff they used to make effectively into bars, and millmen would eat it when they're at their shift. But yeah, it's effectively oats kind of salty water and porridge, and occasionally you put some fruit through it, whatever.
I did discover something on that very topic recently.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it before,
Yeah.
and I think it was maybe a Glasgow thing, but it could have been across Scotland widespread, and I'd just never come across it before. But it was porridge, oats made with water, salted waters, as you say, a little bit of seasoning in it, and they lined a drawer with kind of baking paper or greaseproof paper of some description. And they filled a drawer, and they had a porridge drawer, and they literally opened the drawer and took slices out of it, and that was like lunches. And I mean, you've just got to think back, and I don't know when this would have been. I mean, it would have been for 100 or more years, I guess, and it kind of died out in the 60s and 70s. I think that kind of concept.
It's like
about how poverty-stricken so much of the workforce and the population would have been back then for that to be a thing. Jimmy Legg has bought a dram to say, could you ask if there's any plans for a peated Glencadam?
So not as of yet. Like I was saying about the expanded style of Glencadam, we've never put in additional stills because we very much want to replicate what it's always done. And with that, we're currently at full production at Glencadam, and we literally can't make any more spirit, but we have a use for everything we're making. So to make a peated run would require sacrificing production for a kind of a rest of the range. Never say never. But
I have to say, Jimmy, I know you love your peated whiskies, but Jimmy Legg, I'm going to put some of this in a wee flask, and I'm going to get the Mule Network to get it out to you, Jimmy, because you're not going to want to peat this either. It's every sip is getting better and better, and it's not getting better for everybody. It's getting better for the type of whiskey that I love. And I think that I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to see how well Glencadam would do in a peated cask. I've
actually tried a peated Glencadam once, but it wasn't deliberately peated, and it was actually, I don't know if any of you, I know that
it was made from peated malt.
No, so it was really weird. So this is at Jack Rose Bar in Washington DC, which is an amazing whiskey bar. I was doing a tasting over there, and the guy there has a ridiculous selection of indie bottlings. And he brought over some stuff. He's like, I'm going to show you some things you maybe haven't tried. So brought over some cool Tomintoul single casks, some Glencadam single casks. And I can't remember the exact age, and I kicked myself. It was 1980 something, and it was a Cadenhead's bottling. And he's like, and this is a peated Glencadam. And I was like, what? And he poured it for me, and I was like, sure enough, that's peated. I can't argue with that. But we've never done peated whiskey, not in the last kind of half a century. So I went back and I kind of looked through our archives and checking it, and sure enough, we've never done peated Glencadam in the 80s. So I reckon that it was probably a rogue cask of some kind of full flavored Isla that has ended up being filled into. So it wasn't peated from the barley side of things, but it was a peated Glencadam. And it was really bizarre because I've tried lots of Glencadam from that era, but I'm just like, there's definitely no peated Glencadam from that period. But yeah, it was obviously a rogue cask that was filled with something.
Yeah, that is interesting. Falsgraf is all over the place. He's found the 28-year-old for €288. He's also found the 18-year-old at a reasonable price, but he's looking at the Andalucía, it looks like.
I think the reason for the Andalucía as well is to give somebody a sherry style Glencadam at an affordable price. And when we're kind of talking about price points, it's something that Tomintoul kind of falls into as well. Tomintoul 16-year-old's 44 quid. I know it's chill filtered, but if you can find a 16-year-old whiskey that's £44, I'll shake your hand. But it's one of these things that they've always wanted people to drink the whiskies. And I think even throughout the Angus Dundee range, there's high-end stuff that's expensive, and we do single casks from time to time, and they are more expensive because of the rarity and that kind of thing. But our core range, we do kind of want people to drink. We're not a brand that spends kind of hundreds and thousands of pounds on advertising. You're not going to see billboards with our name on it. We're kind of a people-focused group as well, and I think that kind of comes from the kind of the family attitude to it. And again, although I'm not one of the family, they do treat me really well, and they've given me a lot of responsibility with effectively some of their inheritance, and I take that on board. But they do want people to drink the whiskies, and again, Glencadam, kind of the 10-year-old is always there. We've always been getting kind of people wanting to get sherry Glencadam, and obviously it's a percentage of stock, but also what's around. So we wanted to bring out that option in between. So yeah, if he's looking at some stuff, okay, the 20-year-old's amazing. It's also from 1989, which is arguably the best vintage in the world. There's a particular master blender born in 1989 that I would definitely vouch for. But no, that's pretty special stuff. But actually, since we released Andalucía, I've had a few bottles. It's something I really enjoy as for what it is, for kind of 35, 38 quid. There's no complaints there at all. It's got that lovely kind of juicy sherry without being over the top. It's a Glencadam. You're getting that kind of Highland brightness to it as well.
Juicy is a good word for it, I would say. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like candied apples, or kind of that kind of toffee apples is the thing I always get out of this. It's not a big kind of chocolatey toffee bomb, but there's a bit of that kind of salted caramel there. Nice bit of kind of dried fruit, but without it being kind of too intense.
And what's interesting is that because I've gone from the 18-year-old to this, it's the 18-year-old is lighting up the flavors in this more than the new make did.
Yeah, you're getting more.
I think it's probably the youth of it. It's because there's still this isn't jaggy or raw in any way, but it's young. It's spirit driven.
Yeah.
But I think that what's interesting is that the contrast between the 18 and this is huge, which makes sense, I guess. Whereas when I was trying these two together, that's it's a wonderful thing to do. Just a vertical flight at the best of times. There's an interesting question here, a personal question to you from Eric Cunliffe in Canada. He's saying, is there a Glencadam, single cask or not, that has given Iain the deep pause, knowing that you have access to the warehouses? So what Eric's asking, what's the Glencadam epiphany whiskey for you?
There's a couple, to be honest. The first time I tried Glencadam 21, I really, really fell for it. I didn't try it before I worked at Angus Dundee, and I remember trying through the range. And again, there's some great whiskies in the range, but I remember being like, "This is the kind of whiskey I like." It's kind of Glencadam's quite rustic, although it's quite fruity. So if you look at old whiskey books, kind of Glencadam has existed for a long time. East Highland whiskies were known for being fruity with a spicy backbone. 21-year-old Glencadam doesn't try to be modern. It's got a rustic hit to it. It's got fruitiness of the spirit, but it's also got this lovely kind of earthy, spicy, leathery note in there, which when I was talking about the people that got me into whiskey, it reminds me of drinking whiskey with my granddad. He wasn't drinking 21-year-old single malts, but I remember that kind of feeling, that richness, that intensity of kind of almost like a kind of hug sort of element to it. So that one's always had a soft spot for me. I remember the most kind of jaw-dropping moment Glencadam I've had was Doug, the distillery manager. When I joined, I did a week at each distillery. They let you get involved, and again, from a whiskey geek, that was great. I'm like, I want to scrub the stills, I want to kind of get involved. So I did a week at each distillery, kind of getting mucking in and kind of helping out. I was probably hopeless, but I tried. But I remember kind of they have a cabinet there which has all the range, and he's like, Iain, try this, and it was one of our 1978 vintages. And I don't say that the oldest whiskey is always the best, because it's not. Old whiskey is fantastic, and it's a great way to try heritage, but at the same time, for the money that you'd pay for an old whiskey, you could buy a lot of good younger whiskies and sustain that enjoyment. So again, if you're fortunate enough to be able to do it, great. But if not, that's totally okay, because you could save that money and buy other bottles. But that one was a real ridiculous whiskey. It was a 1978 bourbon cask. I think it was about 48 ABV by the time it was bottled. And it was kind of taken out the side. It comes in our old rustic decanters. You might have seen them online, the kind of square ones.
Yeah, I know.
And he's like, this is pretty good. I think you'll like this, because I was kind of saying that I really like the bourbon cask stuff that we're doing. That was a real kind of, oof. And you know, when he was kind of talking to me throughout it, and I don't remember anything he said.
Yeah,
I was just kind of like, I was kind of staring at him, nodding, but at the same time, just like, this whiskey's brilliant.
It's almost that in filmography, they've got something called a dolly zoom, and it's that dolly zoom effect that when a whiskey hits you like that, it's just you're sucked right into the glass. And everything around you, the peripheral vision, the peripheral sounds are just blurred out, and it's the whiskey that's commanding your attention more.
Yeah,
it's interesting as well that I think this 18-year-old is amazing because of how it's contrasting the 21-year-old now as well. So it's shone this light on the 21 to make the 21-year-old this kind of big decadent thing that it wasn't. I didn't perceive it as previously. You know, it's got kind of a richness that I never picked up on before.
I'll
That's
join you
quite
if you want
surprising.
to that opportunity. But yeah, it's funny. So,
I mean, can I just pause to say that we're drinking the same whiskies?
yeah,
Every single whiskey that I have has been given to me from the community, or I have bought with the funds that the community support me with. It is amazing. So when I sit here with somebody like Iain Forteath and I rave about the products, believe me, it's because I want to bring Iain Forteath on to tell you why they exist while I rave about them. I'll all of these whiskies, if I was buying them and I wasn't enjoying them, I wouldn't have even reached out to Iain in the first place. Iain, you offered to send me something, and I just said, I've got plenty. I've got more than I need. Thank you very much. And in the end, you said, okay, well, I'll send you the new make then, because that's something that you can't necessarily buy. I've had a dram bought for me by, I don't want to miss it, by Daniel Williams. Thank you so much, Daniel. Always great to have you. And he said, not the same as Jim.
I can accept that.
Great vPub. Passion and love for whiskey is the same. So you're no Jim McEwen yet. You've got, according to Daniel Williams, you've got some time to go before you can.
That's very fair, Daniel. I think it's funny. So even as I said, like the cheese eating thing, like I'm quite modest, really. I know I make jokes about kind of maybe being arrogant, but I think being given the title of master blender is quite big shoes to fill. And I don't want anyone to kind of poke at it and be like, oh, that guy's only 31. Like, what the hell does he know about blending? I know that I'm good at what I do, but I know that there's lots to learn. And I think that being of an age that I've looked up to people like David Stewart and Bill Lumsden and Jim McEwen and these kind of guys, I idolize these guys. And I think that, like Robert as well, is a real kind of generally in-house kind of, I bug him for more than he's aware of, because I literally phone him anytime there's anything I'm curious about.
Yeah.
And all I aim to do is try to kind of fill that gap. If I can rise to be as good as those guys and kind of honor the title of master blender, that's the best thing I can really do. And to be honest, it's kind of, from my involvement in blending and whiskey, it's always kind of been a point I've wanted to pitch towards, and I've achieved it faster than I thought I would. And part of that is this trust from Angus Dundee, but it's something that, I'm aware I'm not a Jim McEwen, but I aspire to be like him at some day. But
it's something that I do when I've got an Iain Forteath on. I want to talk to him about, I want to get my geek on, I want to talk about the whiskies, I want to talk about your opinion, your attitude, how you ended up, all of these things.
Yeah.
When I have the pleasure of somebody like a James MacArthur, a Jim McEwen, and I hope a Robert Fleming at some point in the future, the story is not about that and the now, the contemporary, the moment, and what they perceive as being the future. The story is about their story. Their decades in the industry, the human element and the human side and things like that. And it's interesting. So that's a nice segue, Iain, for me to ask you, is before we kind of switch things up a wee bit and maybe play a wee quick game of Visit a Speyside before I bully you into staying for the quiz.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to ask you, you're in this role now, you feel the weight of responsibility, but honestly, I think you're on a good, steady foundation for it because of your passion, because of your love for the product. Nice. Where do you see that evolution continuing? We've come out of this where the world has been provided this consistent product against all odds, starting with the ushers in the mid-19th century, starting with all the independent grocers and blenders. They were able to provide a consistent product that shouldn't have existed, honestly, but they found a way to do it, and then they relied on the coffee still to give them the backbone to continue doing that for another 150 years up till now, and it's still continuing today. And malt was always there, but it was seen as too strongly flavoured. Well, now we're in different days. The more flavour, the better, right?
Enough. I know.
And it's crazy. It's almost like, no, sorry, the market is saturated now. There's too much whiskey, and yet it flies off the shelf like there isn't enough. It's insatiable.
Yeah.
Where does Iain Forteath see positioning the Angus Dundee wagon, but also whiskey in general, as Daniel Williams buys me another wee dram to say, you're well on the way if you ask me. It wasn't a put down about Jim. I'm loving this vPub. The new generation is alive and kicking with heaps of passion. Very nice words, Daniel. I'm sure you'll take that as well.
Thank you.
So but no pressure. Where do you, I mean, obviously I'm going to ask about where Iain Forteath wants to take it, where you see it going.
Yeah.
But also an objective kind of step back and look at it, because for every good bit of news, there's a wee bit of worrying news at the same time. So I'm interested.
It's a funny one because obviously, I mean, the industry as it is now is at an all-time high. Malts have never been, whiskey has never been as open and available as it has been before. Available is maybe a wrong term because again, it's the budget of it is increasing. But in terms of what's out there in the market and also just the buoyancy of the market, it's at an all-time high. If it's anything to learn from history and all these things, is that doesn't always exist, and I think it's unrealistic to pretend that it's going to continue to be like this forever. I think that whether it's based on price, stock availability, or whatever it is, the bubble's got to pop at some point. Hopefully that won't end in the ways that it's done before, because that would be pretty tragic. And I definitely tip my hat to the new distilleries of the world. They're the ones that are taking the risk, I suppose, because the new distilleries are the ones that need to kind of fight up and prove themselves before this happens, if it does happen. I suppose that companies like Angus and Dundee, we're kind of fortunate that we've got a pretty solid roots. I think that again, if I could get you, I'd love you to speak to Terry at some point. He probably wouldn't be up for this kind of thing just because he's quite a modest man, really, for a guy that built a pretty impressive business. But his thing is all about foundation, and it's kind of he obviously built it. He's been through the 80s and the 70s. He's seen the whiskey lakes. He's seen it all go through and go up and down, and very much what he's tried to do is try to build an infrastructure. So we have a good supply of casks. We have 2 distilleries that are working max capacity. We have a bottling plant. We have lots of storage, and we have enough kind of investment that we can sit on it for a while as well. We don't need to release everything at 3-year-olds. It's not what we do. So even if it did pop, it's the kind of thing that we'd like to think we can still keep our head above the water and we can still supply product. And I definitely, you know yourself, when people started switching to non-age statements for everything, it was the kind of medium tier guys that were complaining because we've been laying it down for a long time. And Angus and Dee is very much one of those groups. Like, kind of for us, since we bought Tomintoul in 2000, since we bought Glencadam in 2003, we've been laying down stock all the time. So for people to then say, the age doesn't matter so much, it's like, well, we've actually got quite a lot of it.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's an element of the fact that we've got a kind of consistency for production. Obviously, that depends on availability and depends on sales and whatever else. So in terms of the market, I think it will dip at some point, but hopefully not as low as it's been before. I think that'll be an interesting time in a carnivorous way, because I think that distilleries will change hands again and things like that. I think it would be fair to say that at some point Angus Dundee would love to have another distillery to our belt at some point, but we're not necessarily proactively looking. But I think that, like someone said in the comments, I'm pretty sure someone said, if you want to do a peated whiskey, just buy another distillery. I wish it was as simple as that. But it's something that kind of there's an element of that. It'll be interesting to see what comes of it. And again, that's not saying that we're sitting wanting to buy somebody. That's not the case. But I think that if things peak and trough, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that afterwards. Angus Dundee's position, what Iain Forteath can bring to the table, is a new kind of passing through our distillery style. So something I've been working on is lots of new cask finishes for our products. That doesn't mean 3-month finishes. Angus Dundee don't do that. We do long finishes. Again, they're a very liquid, proud company, and I suppose it's rubbed off on me. I can't say so much about it as necessarily myself, although I'm obviously very proud to bring forward what I can do. But I'm starting to play about with casks that we hadn't really stuck together before. So like Tomintoul Cigar Malt's a new one that we've done, which is made up of peated and unpeated and sherry Tomintoul, all put together, which we never did before. We never really merged them together. And I was like, these are great ingredients together. Let's make a product with them.
Because of course at Tomintoul you've got the peated malt, which is the Old Ballantrae, right?
Yeah. Which again is kind of undersung. Expect to see more things from Old Ballantrae as well.
Good. I'm a huge fan, despite me sitting raving about a quiet cask and at this age, I'm a huge fan of sherry and peat. It works very, very well together. Sorry, Iain, continue, please.
No, it's okay. So it's something that I've been bringing in more casks for us to use, and a lot of them are starting to come old enough. Although I think one of them might be new, but although most of them have been done by other distilleries, we're not, like I said, we're not trailblazers, but we'll do it right. It's kind of the way to look at it. But we've got some pretty interesting cask finishes that are coming of age that you will see within the next few months, and the others towards the end of the year. And there's more to come. So there's that element of it, but also a consistency thing. I think that I don't want to lose what's core range. I think that the Glencadam 10 is a really staple product, and a lot of my job is actually maintaining what's already been done. There's already, as you said, quite an extensive range in Tomintoul and Glencadam, and part of what I'll do is very much making sure that they stay consistent and they stay the same. And actually,
that's the trick, isn't it? Keeping the balance there and making sure you're putting out a 10-year-old, but still having plenty to continue the consistency and the direction going forward. Everyone is asking, just quickly, Ben Marnock has mentioned that he remembers doing a costing presentation to Terry Hillman on a Matisse bottling about 18 years ago. He's a tough cookie with unbelievable intensity, and I was shitting myself, he said. And everyone was saying, so a question for Iain, when you put a new make in the barrel, how confident are you that it's going to turn out the way you expect? And I think that's on that amazing theme that we never even touched on when we talk about evolution, is back in the day, back in the Victorian times and previous, consistency was an elusive bedfellow, right? It just didn't exist. And that was with spirit, the production of the spirit, and obviously the maturation. But today, everyone, I think Iain would probably be a bit more confident.
Yeah, it's a funny one. So maintenance is actually harder than product creation. And I think that big companies have teams that work on that stuff to make sure it tastes the same over and over. Whereas in Angus and Dundee, it's myself and Robert and a couple of others. So you can take a recipe and you can run and say, okay, we're going to use 40% BB1 first fills, 20% BB2s, 20% kind of BB3s, and then maybe some refill. Which is great on paper, but actually it never works out that way because actually every cask tastes different. There's definitely a stability element. So I know that a 10-year-old Glencadam that's spent its entire life in a first fill bourbon cask should taste like X, but actually of that, maybe 10% won't quite fit that profile. And then what it is, it's adjusting to make sure that you can create that flavor style again. And that's something that I've learned a lot from Robert. Robert, I saw a question earlier asking if Robert's taken away from the blending. He still does quite a lot of our core range, so I work with him on those. But Robert is, as Roy actually really well put, I think that Robert is very much in charge of making the liquids. I can't distill. I'd love to, but they won't let me free in the distillery. But no, I literally, it's not my expertise. I'm good with flavors. I'm lucky that my palate's reasonable. I can play around with product when it's matured. So I have an easy job really because I just open the spice cabinet and start making some dishes. They have to provide the ingredients. So Robert is going to oversee all of that side. I'm working very closely with him. So don't worry, I'm not nudging Robert by any means. He's still very much the guy I look up to. So I heard a few people when I first announced that I got my new position. They're like, "But what about Robert?" I was like, "No, he's still here."
I was one of them, and I have to say that's what triggered me to reach out to you. So I said, "Oh wow, I need to act fast then because if I don't want Robert disappearing off into the sunset in retirement." But then when you explained the thing, I said, okay, we've got time to do this, so let's do it. The new guard. Let's see where we are today, and then at some point in the future, hopefully tempt Robert to come on. Yeah. So that's interesting. But I'm going to ask you one final question before we have a wee bit of fun. Glencadam has been presented to us, and we're embracing it as such, and I hope it's succeeding. Honestly, I do. As a naturally presented, honest integrity, as Ralphie would say.
Yeah,
it's ticking all the ABCD boxes in terms of age statement, bottling strength, chill filtration, no dye, no colouring added. Fantastic. Is Iain's going to maintain that as much as he possibly can?
Yeah.
And we've already heard that you're pushing the envelope a wee bit in the Tomintoul stuff and interested to bring us more of that. You mentioned cask finishes on Tomintoul as well. And that's going to be interesting because then we'll be able to explore a distillery as an enthusiast.
Yeah.
Where previously it's been that kind of gentle dram for us. Whereas we'll get a chance to, and it's of course that occasionally we can buy it as an indie and things and explore it in a different way. But I think it's always interesting to enjoy it as the producer wants it to be represented.
It's something that definitely we'll cater more for that going forward. I think it's fair to say. I think that whether we change the entire core lineup, I don't know, because obviously we have good custom and sales for these products. But it is something to expect more of. I think there are elements of our range that will change, and that will probably be replaced by higher proof products. We've not quite got them onto a cask-strength yet, but watch the space. But it's something that they definitely. There's definitely room for both, and I think, oh god, the cat's here. I knew that was going to happen at some point tonight.
That's okay. I have two of them too.
But yeah, so I think that element that kind of will continue to create a bit of both. The 14-year-old is a kind of nod to the fact that Tomintoul can do 46 and bourbon cask as well.
And bringing that creamy note into it, bringing that kind of that nice spice that the ABV brings, the extra grip and intensity of the 14-year-old, I think is interesting, and it shows that it doesn't need to be that gentle dram. It has the ability to do a wee bit more, and I would encourage that. And I think, honestly speaking, it's just I've used the word a few times recently, and I'm starting to annoy myself with it. But that zeitgeist, that general trend, that is kind of moving. People are demanding, not just in whiskey, but across the board, they're demanding natural products. So it makes sense that you should try and be at least in a position to fulfill that and stand up and be able to do it going forward. And I just hope that you're somehow able to keep the pricing and availability accessible to no pressure, Iain Forteath.
Well, it's funny. I think that Tomintoul has a lot to give, and hopefully from trying the new make, you can kind of get a feel for Tomintoul spirit as well. I think that every distillery has their experimental one, so I'm not going to pretend that we're new with that idea, but Tomintoul is our more experimental distillery. It's more modern. We have more liquid from it. It's also quite a versatile spirit. Whereas Glencadam is heritage. It's a brand that doesn't need played with too much. It's a whiskey that is great on its own credits. It suits traditional cask types. It suits non-chill filtration. It's a whiskey that you don't need to do much with Glencadam to get people to love it. And again, that makes my job quite easy. Generally, I could go into the warehouse and grab a cask at random and be quite confident. It'll be quite nice to try. And I think that Tomintoul has that as well, but it's got the ability to be more malleable. So I think that Tomintoul hasn't given everything it's got to give yet. I'm really sorry, my cat keeps jumping on here.
Eric Cunliffe is asking, what's the name of the cat and does it chase timorous beastie?
It's called Jazz, or she's called Jazz. She's decided to be very friendly right now, but
don't worry about it at all.
She must like your voice, Roy, because did the as well. She doesn't normally come up in tasting, so it must be it must be a cat guy.
But when I'm working away through the day, you know, they just come up and they hang out on the desk and they just literally lays out on the desk in front of you. So listen, I know I know exactly what it's like. Let's kind of round off there and say that I think we are in a good place in terms of the range that you brought out. I think it's been very clear. A lot of the questions I asked you tonight, we didn't really need to ask. It's been clear by your demonstration where you're going as an organisation. You've got a legacy market out there that you're looking after with a huge portfolio of branded product out there, blends and things. Tomintoul coming along as the malt, the original malt that you acquired and things. You've gone out there and you've kind of done what the industry has done, is you've provided a malt for them at the same presentation.
Yeah.
But then given the opportunity to expand that range, you've done so. And especially with Glencadam and putting toes in the water, it's very good to hear that there's going to be more of that from Tomintoul. With Glencadam, you firmly pointed this towards much more natural presentation. And as malt fans tend to be, we're very predictable creatures, aren't we? But it's because we just love the thing so much and we want it to be as intact as possible and we don't want it messed around with. So I have to say thank you for the guardianship of those whiskies. Thank you for bringing us those, and thank you for making it affordable for us as well. I think the recognition you're getting, not just from me in this channel and the noises I've been making for the last while, but Ralphie as well. That's Whiskey of the Year, 2 spectacular scores for the Glencadam 10. You know, and generally, I hope that that's going to start to ripple out to lots of other people are going to get a chance to get connected with this natural product. But I'll thank you very, very much. I'm going to raise a glass of my favourite tonight, and it's kind of hard. It's hard for me between the 18 and 21 because when I went back into 21, that richness came through. But I think the surprise for me tonight is the last wee drip of that 18-year-old. I predict before I go to bed tonight, there'll be another wee tablespoon of this poured into the glass. Iain, thank you very much for your openness. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for contributing. Cheers.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Can you hang around for a few minutes more?
Of course, I'm here all night. It's all good.
You've suggested that we might be able to let somebody in the chat win a sniper coin. These things are in demand. The only way you can get a hold of these is to play a wee game of this, either by popping on the live and playing along to get one of these wee glass toppers here. And all you have to do is guess, either before me or after me, what bottle Iain has got hidden in the background. We're going to play a wee quick game of Is It a Speyside. We will be doing a quiz at the end as well, and as you can imagine, there will be some on-theme questions in there as well. I'm handicapped. I don't get 10 questions like everybody else does. I only get 9. You've got a core range single malt off to the side, haven't you, Iain?
I do indeed.
It's widely available. People can buy this. It's part of the core range, yes?
Yep.
Excellent. In that case, you can only answer yes or no, and I'll start by asking the obvious. My friend, is it a Speyside?
Yes.
It is. That's worrying because there's a lot of them. The next thing to ask then, I would have to say, is it owned by one of the big 4, that is Diageo, Pernod Ricard, Edrington, or Grants?
Yes.
Ooh. Is it a Glen?
No.
It's not a Glen. Is it a Diageo product?
Yes.
Okay. It's a Diageo that's not a Glen. Does it have an age statement?
Yes.
If it's core range, almost all of it's going to be 46 or under. No, so 43 or under even. Diageo.
I'm loving the chat, by the way. It's great.
Yeah, I'm trying to ignore the chat because I know the chat tends to.
Yeah.
I want to play this game. Okay, let's. If it's not a Glen, then let's ask. Was it one of the? I'm not going to ask if it's one of the original classic malts because it'd just be Cragganmore then. So let's go with. It does have an age statement. Yes, did I ask that?
Yep.
Is it? Is it 12 years or under?
No.
Ooh. Is it an 18-year-old?
No.
Is it a flora and fauna, Iain?
No.
It might be quite old. Is it a knock-do?
No.
Okay, I'm on my absolute last question here. It can't be a Glen Elgin because Glen Elgin's a Glen. Oh dear. Mortlach 16.
It is, in fact, Craggan. No, it's more like 16. Well done.
Oh my god. I'm very pleased about that.
Well, I thought you shot yourself in the foot when you said, is it 18-year-old? I'm like, oh, he's not going to think of the in-betweens. I thought you would have been like, under 18 over, yeah.
I cannot tell you how relieved. That is probably the most classic example I can think of.
Well, when you said flora and fauna, I was like, oh, not anymore.
I was literally on the ropes asking for a cold towel. My goodness. That's incredible. Curtis Campbell is saying, you've got to be kidding me. Yeah, Curtis, I nicked it. I stole it right at the end. Let's see if anybody there's Mortlach 16, lots of Mortlachs in the
Yeah, there's a few going through.
Yeah, lots of Mortlachs being answered. Mortlach, Bruno Martin said Mortlach 16. Did they get to you before? Mortlach 12.
Yeah.
It could be Bruno. It could be Bruno. It could be that I'm sending a sniper coin over to Portugal. I'm not sure. I'll have a look at that on the replay.
I had a few sets of ideas. I was like, either I do Old Ballantrae, but I thought that's a bit too predictable. So I thought Tomintoul would be too easy. Old Ballantrae could be hard, but also could be easy if you manage to go down that route.
Well, I mean, I guess that if you'd have got me in Speyside and I hadn't tackled the peated thing, it would have been difficult.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so there's a few, but I just grabbed a favorite from another distilling company. I love a Mortley. So
yeah. That was literally sniping you as you ran out the door.
That was impressive.
Got you through the thinnest of gaps. Superb. Jimmy Legg is saying, bless you, Jimmy. Thank you so much. He's brought me a dram to say, Roy, you're the man. Wow. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you so much. Iain, you're going to be a good enough sport to stay and play the quiz at the end as well. Thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for hanging out with me this late. I know that we've gone ridiculously late. I said to Iain at the opening, if we go over, please don't worry about it. We're just going to go right ahead and have the discussion. No script. We'll just treat it as a pub, right? That's exactly what we're going to do.
Absolutely.
Now, you don't have any idea. I didn't ask you to verify these questions. Sometimes I do that with guests, but we decided at the opening that you would just play along with everyone else. What we tend to do, Iain, is have a wee piece of paper with A, B, and C written on it. If you've got,
I can sort that out.
It's not that important. It's only you. You're only playing against yourself, so don't worry. You maybe don't even need that now.
No pressure.
Curtis Campbell bought me a dram as well. Thank you very much. And
that was very impressive. I'm seeing a few people in the comments being like, "What a sniper shot!" But that was impressive.
Bruno Martins is saying it was maybe Fraser Thistle. Fraser, superb. Congratulations if you managed to snag yourself a coin. I don't think I've sent you one yet. And Graham Fraser is saying Fraser Thistle got it, I think, Roy. It's a shame that the Doc isn't in tonight because Doc, I didn't have time to send him the quiz. He usually checks the questions.
All right.
But the problem with him doing that, he doesn't get to play along. So tonight you would have had a chance to play with everyone else, but hopefully Doc will pick it up on the replay. I hope he's doing well. I'm thinking about him, and I know that he's got lots on his mind right now. I was hoping to see him in tonight. I'll catch up with him later, and maybe he can catch this on the replay. I'm talking about Macallan Fine and Rare, of course. Yeah. Iain, it's always multiple choice. You know the drill. You've seen this before, haven't you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm nervous though. I feel like especially if they're Angus Dundee related, I'm going to be
That's right. That is unfortunate, and I know your pain because Menno's quiz was last week, and I was brutalised by it last week. Wonderful stuff. Snapper XV is saying phone dropped, came back to one question left, and bar full of Tamdu and knock. Thought I had missed my normal early snipe of Tamdu 15. It wasn't Tamdu 15 tonight, but if you keep sticking at it, somebody will pick Tamdu.
You just keep going for it at some point.
Keep going. Right, according to the doc, we don't know. He doesn't have a rating tonight because he'll tell us after the event. I didn't give him the quiz it's going to be interesting to see how Doc goes on. But good luck, everybody. Multiple choice as always. Question 1. Oh, I have to talk about this, don't I? I have to talk about Sunday. I'm hoping to hang out with all of you. I did a draw. All the virtual drams that came in during the Jim McEwen session, I spent that money to buy tickets for everyone, and I drew those tickets on Sunday night on the Patreon-only lock-in. So that way I'm supporting the charity and giving back to the community as well. So 11 of you in the end managed to get your hands on tickets for Last Chat with Jim McEwen on Sunday. It's at 9 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Pacific time. I've got my ticket. I'm really looking forward to seeing you there. It'd be nice if there was a bunch of barflies in the chat as well, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you there. Remember, this is only a $20 ticket now, and all of it, I believe, goes to charity for the Scotland's Charity Air Ambulance. I hope to see you there on Sunday. Question 1. According to the opinion of Irish whisky industry at the time, why wasn't coffee's continuous still adopted in the mid-19th century? This is a bit of a crunchy start, if I'm honest, not because of the question, but because of the potential answers.
Yeah.
A, they chose not to adopt it because it was prohibitively high in their capital investment. It was just too high a capital investment. B, it didn't produce whiskey. Or C, it wasn't efficient enough. So the Irish did not adopt coffee's refined design of the continuous still. But what did they suggest was the reasoning for it? A, prohibitively expensive in terms of capital investment. B, it didn't produce whiskey. Or C, it wasn't efficient enough.
Should that be whiskey with an E?
I'm glad you point that out. No, back in 1830, when he came along, it was absolutely whiskey without the E. The E came along much, much later.
I wasn't sure if it was a trick there, but I like it.
Yeah, we weren't bitching about how to spell whiskey back then, honestly. And anybody that bitches about how to spell whiskey in modern times needs to go into a quiet room and have a wee word with themselves.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Iain, what do you think? What A, B, or C? B, absolutely. They felt that it produced an inferior product, which it certainly produced a different product.
Yeah,
but they didn't have the foresight at the time to realise that it could be the backbone for them in order to produce a nice, consistent thing that could compete against the brandies, the cognacs, and eventually the lack of those due to phylloxera in the later 19th century. But there you go. It was Scotch whisky's gain. Question 2, single malt whisky was first defined in which year? A, the Scotch Whisky Act of 1971, B, the Scotch Whisky Act of 1988, or C, the Scotch Whisky Act of 2009. So I'm speaking about the term single malt whisky was actually defined in the definitions in which year? 71, 88, or 2009? Are you confident of this, or do you have a wee waiver on? I had a waiver on.
I've got a waiver on as well, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can understand why. I hope that helps some people dial in and get to it. It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, the chat. Oh, this is splitting the lounge tonight. It's absolutely splitting them. What would you suggest, Iain? What do you think?
I was going to go for B. Only... Initially, I thought it was A, but I've talked myself out of it. But because I was thinking about pure malts and all that malarkey. But yeah.
Well,
I'm not confident.
The pure malt thing was 2003. Cardew changed their product and switched to pure malt in 2003, and I believe that added fuel to the fire for it actually to be a legal definition that wasn't fully enforced until 2009.
Really?
Now, I think I was kind of scrabbling around because I almost couldn't believe this.
Yeah.
I thought that single malt has been around. It's been around for so much longer.
Yeah.
But an actual definition, and it didn't make the definitions, or it wasn't tightened up until 2009. If somebody wants to challenge me on that, and it is in fact the original Scotch Whisky Act of 1988, which by the way I couldn't find online. I went onto the regulations website, and then they just had links to the superseded document. So I'm sure that there is an archive link or something out there to find it.
I think as far as the topic of tonight being the evolution of whiskey, that's quite a good example of how recent things really are.
Aye, well, even if it's 1988, that's right. So if people do feel strongly that it's 1988, absolutely give yourself a point. But I was quite shocked at the article I found. I should have kept it open so I could have linked it to everybody. Yeah, it said that it wasn't actually tightened until 2009.
Wow,
so there you go. Question 3. Angus Dundee purchased Tomintoul from which other well-known whiskey brand in 2000? This didn't actually come up tonight, did it? I don't know if we gave this away
briefly, but not in depth. People that were super eagle-eyed, I might have mentioned a different distillery by them. But
yes, that's right. Yeah, I think it did. There you go. Question 3. Tomintoul was purchased by Angus Dundee from A, Chivas Brothers, or B, White and Mackay, or C, Diageo. You know this one, of course you do, Iain.
Yeah, I'm still waiting. I wasn't sure if you. I don't know if you want to give it more time before I held up the sign.
Well, the lounge has absolutely nailed this. They know for sure. They're absolutely convinced. They were either listening tonight or they knew it anyway. But it was indeed
Diageo. I'm joking.
Absolutely. And it's funny. It's because it wasn't until I was kind of reading up on tonight that I reminded myself that was the case.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it was an Allied distillery at one point, and White and Mackay was part of Allied, I think.
Yeah, so it was Hay and Strang were the other guys that kind of pushed it forward. But Robert actually came with us from White and Mackay. So Robert was working for White and Mackay and Tomintoul, and then joined us.
Superb.
So there you go. That's good. Good question.
Superb. Well done. Question it was White and Mackay indeed. B. So if you answered B, give yourself a point. Question 4. Malt whisky has long been bottled as a niche product for over a century, but which of these is fake? So even if it was inconsistent or considered strongly flavoured, it's always been available here, there, and everywhere, just not particularly heavily branded, marketed, or exported.
Yeah.
But one of these is clearly fake. A pre-World War II Macallan as a single malt. B, a 1950s Tomintoul as a single malt. Or C, a 1990s Whsiky as a single malt. One of those doesn't exist. I think that these questions are not too tricky. They're not in any way close to Menno standard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I'm feeling anyway.
Mennos were tough going. I only got a couple because they were related to my brands. But yeah, I think I got 7 out of 10 with Menno. But it was grueling, and there was a few that were on the fence.
You beat me. That's tremendous. A 7 out of 10 on a Menno quiz. That's the best I've ever done on a Menno quiz, I think.
It was definitely a good test. I was like, this is. I say there was a few. The wordings were impressive. I liked the one about the same year as Dallas 2, etc., etc. That was clever.
Yes, the asshat questions, the way those
well balanced.
Whisky Central is doing the right thing and going with the crowd. What would you say? You know, what cannot exist from that list? 1950s Tomintoul, absolutely. Why is that?
Because it was only founded in 1965.
Absolutely. So for a pre-World War II Macallan, we know that those exist. You only
There's
have to
quite a lot of fakes as well, but yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. But as a bottled single malt with Macallan on the label, you can go to the whiskey wall in Macallan and you can actually see examples of that. And the Whsiky didn't actually close until 93, so you can still get 1990s Whsiky.
Yeah, good stuff too.
Question 5. I'm just going to ask. We're looking at a distillery. It's not a Graham Fraser picture tonight. I do love Graham Fraser's pictures, and I will lean on him more in the future. I do share the source where I got this from in a moment. Are we looking at this kind of cluster of buildings here? Is A, Glencadam, B, Glendronach, or C, Glenmorangie? Which Glen are we looking at? A, Glencadam, C, Glendronach, or A, Glencadam, B, Glendronach, or C, Glenmorangie. Lassie Oatsman is in. He thinks it's Glencadam he's looking at. Good to see you, Lassie. One Glassman Warner is in. Good to see you, Warner. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Stevie is in. Say, yeah, a lot of pre-World War II Macallan is fake, but it could exist. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely spot on, Steve. I'm not sure there is any genuinely real stuff about even the stuff in the whiskey wall. Macallan has been proven to be fake on occasion as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've got a fantastic picture I took. I snapped of one where they've actually got a spelling mistake.
Oh, really?
I had actually spelled, I can't remember if it was registered or one of these words on the label. I need to share it with you, but it's quite interesting to look at that thing. That's not necessarily proof that it's fake, by the way. Yeah, but yeah, I know that they've had trouble verifying their own bottlings that they've been buying.
Yeah.
This is splitting the lounge a wee bit as well. But Iain, tell us what we're looking at here. This is Glencadam, and
but it's an interesting aspect of Glencadam because you don't necessarily see it from that angle, which is good.
Well, I pinched it from the Angus Dundee website.
Yeah.
So it's a wee bit grainy. It's not the best picture, but there's a lot of there's quite a big plot of land there, a nice green parkland out the front there, and
yeah, but it's actually a graveyard. But apart from that.
Is it? Okay, wow.
Yeah, I once, so like I said, Glencadam is the town of Brechin's kind of grown up around it. So the cemeteries on 2 sides of Glencadam. In fact, one of the old distillery managers is buried just outside the doorstep, which is quite cool. But as far as these things go, but no, I used to make a joke that we had the highest angels share of any distillery, but I got told it was a bit morbid.
But it makes sense to me. Just kind of, it's almost a comforting thought that you could just kind of get up of an evening and wander back into the distillery to help yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, so until it was still about the mid 90s, Glencadam used to be a public walkway. So there's a few stillmen that work there that used to work back in the day. When it was owned by Allied to Mick, and they used to get drunks kind of turning up at 2 a.m. who just walked through the distillery and tried to buy some whiskey. Because you could literally walk through the site. There was no fences or gates.
Fantastic.
So that was kind of, on people's way back from the pub, they'd walk through a distillery on the way home. Imagine doing that. That'd be great fun. But
I'm not sure I would make it home.
well, yeah, true. Yeah. So people are trying to barter for casks and stuff. I'll give you a fiver and some chips. It doesn't really.
We've got some puns in the lounge, and Bimo is saying you can see the stones absolutely, but Tresterig 12 is saying the dead centre of Brechin.
Oh, jeez.
Eric Cunliffe is saying you can bury me near the doorstep of Glencadam as well.
Yeah.
We've got to bring you over from Canada, and Precarious Dave is in as well, saying good gag, Iain. Right, it's going to get tricky from here on in. I don't know how you're scoring at the halfway point, folks, but it's going to get a wee bit trickier, I think. Question 6: what occurrence in 1860 can be said to have kickstarted the era of the blended whiskey that we know today? What occurrence in 1860 can be said to have kickstarted the era of blended whiskey we know today? Is it A, the creation of Usher's OVG, that's Old Vatted Glenlivet, B, Gladstone's Spirits Act, or C, coffee inventing his still? This, I think, is a tricky question. If you know, you know, I suppose, but I think it's a tricky one. I put the banana skin down there, not to suggest I'm being sneaky, but just to suggest that it could trip some people up. Do you feel you know this one, Iain?
No.
Okay.
I'm contradicting myself.
I think it's easy to second guess on this one a wee bit.
Is it 1960 on the dot or the 1960s?
No, it's 1860.
Okay, 1860 on the dot. All right.
1860 on the dot.
Ugh.
I hope that helps.
It does, but now I've got everything confused in my head. I blame the whiskies.
One, as soon as you commit to one, I'll tell everyone. Go ahead. B, you're going for Gladstone's Spirits Act. I can tell you that C, coffee inventing his still was in the 1820s, and he finally got his patent in 1830, so we're good with that. That's not it. The creation of Usher's OVG was in the 1850s, meaning that Gladstone Spirits Act, which allowed grocers and blenders to blend prior to duty being applied, so they could blend and bond, and that was the catalyst for exploding them being able to blend the product and then not worry about the taxes and the duties to be paid until the point of sale, which was a huge turnaround.
That is a good question, though. I was between that and the OVG. I couldn't remember the dates.
It's so close, and I was wary of that, which is why I put the banana skin in there. But well done, you survived unscathed. Question 7: which of these is not an Angus Dundee product? Which is not from the Angus Dundee stable? I think this is trickier than you might imagine. You want this to be Old Ballantrae and Glencadam and something else random, but no. A, Glen Parker, B, Glenkirk, or C, Glencraig. One of those is not an Angus Dundee product. And 2 are. I have to say, if it was me that was answering this, I would be throwing a dart and guessing. I only know this. Well, that's not true. I think there might be something rattling around in my head that might help me and give me a bit of a lifeline on it. But the lounge has done very, very well here. Quite amazing, knowledgeable folk that you are. What do you think, Iain? C, Glencraig, absolutely. Glen Parker and Glenkirk are both Angus Dundee blends, and Glencraig is actually a malt that was produced in a Lomond still at Glenmorangie distillery.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and that's probably the only thing that might have saved me if I was on the other end of it, that I might have had something rattling around in my head about Lomond stills and Glenmorangie and Glencraig.
Do you know which one's a single malt and which one's a blend?
Are one of those a malt?
Yeah.
Which?
Well, I was going to ask you.
I'm going to guess that because there's another brand I know it's called Parker's, just Parker's.
Yeah.
So I'm going to suggest that Glen Parker is the malt.
It's in fact Glenkirk. But yeah, there's Parker's as well.
Nice. So which malt is it?
I can't tell you, but it is a single malt range. It was originally made for Total Wine in the USA, so it's a single malt range through it.
Fantastic. So there you go. Glenpark is a blend. Glenkirk is in fact a malt, and Glencraig is a malt made in a Lowman still. Long since gone an experimental thing. If you answered C, give yourself a point. Question 8. News broke this week that Brora is once more running Spirit. For every minute I spend being ecstatically excited about this, Iain, I spend another minute being a wee bit nervous. There's a barfly emoji here for the first time because this is news that broke in the Aquaviti Barth Facebook page, Aquaviti Barfly's Facebook page.
Oh.
But what can you buy for £300 or £600 as part of this news? Can you buy A? You can pre-order 1 for 300 or 2 for 600 3-year-old bottlings. They'll take your money now and they'll give you a bottle at 3 years old. Or is it B? You can book a tour for £300 or £600 for this year. Or is it C? It's a commemorative Dr. Jim Beveridge authored book, either signed for 600 or not signed for 300. I see you shifting in your seat.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this one. I mean,
good.
Yeah. I need to check the Barfly's Facebook page. I think that's the
Yes, you'd be a very welcome member, my friend. I'm going to have either you look at the lounge and go with the crowdsourced answer.
Well, only I was going to be honest because I'm seeing all the lounge adverts, the lounge answers, and they're not the same as mine. But I could switch. But I'll go be honest and say that I was going to say A, but I'm guessing it's B.
It is absolutely B.
Yeah,
that's B.
Oh. 600 quid for a tour.
Well, yeah. And the thing is that you gag, but you have to think that if you, I think there used to be a tour there. It was Whiskey Rover was in the chat as well, and he mentioned that if you went to the tour, back before they started the renovations, you'd pay £100 to tour the old Brora. So you have to assume that they were giving you some of the old liquid as part of that tour. And maybe that's what the 3 or 600 is about, but they didn't have any specific details.
You can get 50 tours at Glencadam's new distillery for that. So
exactly.
And you've still got the old Spirit.
Yeah. I'm genuinely excited that Brora is back on stream.
Yeah, no, me too.
I'm a wee bit worried that at some point in the very, very near future, I'll realise immediately that it's no closer to being in my reach. It's just as out of reach as it's always been, right?
To be honest, it's one of the big guys that I consistently really enjoy. I've had other kind of the big names that are the closed distilleries that have let me down. Some have been amazing and some have been not so great. I don't think I've had a bad Brora, to be honest. So
no, I had a 1982, which is widely, it was only at 43% of G&M.
Yeah,
it was widely panned as being kind of one of the pallid Broras, and I absolutely adored every sip.
Yeah,
it's.
I've not had a bad one yet.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not something that the joining fee is £1,000 plus today, so it's very, very difficult for us. So, Diageo, I hope you're able to do something that means that most people can enjoy it at some point in the future.
Yeah.
Anyway, question 9: who has Charlie MacLean referred to as the father of single malt?
Ooh.
Interesting. Charlie MacLean is on record as referencing this gentleman as the father of single malt. Is it A, Gordon and MacPhail's George Urquhart, B, Glenlivet's founder, George Smith, or C, historian Alfred Bernard?
Oh.
Trickier than you imagined, I guess. The father of single malt. And it's very much in line with what we've been discussing tonight. I hope that helps a wee bit. Jimmy Legg is saying, me, I'm the father of single malt. You may be, Jimmy, but we need to tell Charlie MacLean that that's the case.
Unless Jimmy's got a son called Single Malt or a daughter called Single Malt, in which case he may well be the father of Single Malt. Yeah. Ooh. I don't know this one. This is a shot in the dark, which is maybe bad.
That's okay. That's okay if you don't know it. It's actually there are some mixed replies in the. I thought this would be a wee bit easier, but this would be tricky by the banana skin. What do you think? What you going for?
So just on the base that George Smith was the kind of the big guy that drove forward in Speyside, I was going for George Smith, but I can understand why it'd be Urquhart. Alfred Barnard, I know that he's obviously a writer, but yeah, I don't know. But I'm guessing it might be him because obviously Charles MacLean has a lot of reference to old text. So yeah, I really don't know. I was putting B, but I have a feeling it's wrong.
Alfred Bernard was pretty agnostic. He recorded all the distilleries, whether they were malt or grain or otherwise.
Yeah.
He was a historian, and he did write. You're absolutely right. Charles MacLean didn't. Glenlivet's founder, George Smith, was the first in Speyside to take up a legal license to distill. But in fact, in the times when blends were all the rage, the pioneers, the people that were pushing malts forward, amongst others, of course, were G&M, and that's why Charlie suggests that George Urquhart was is referred to as the father of single malt. There you go. So how are you scoring, Iain? You've done quite well.
So I think I've got 3 wrong so far. So yeah, I'm sitting at 6 out of 9.
So I have to suggest that we will finish on a wee bit of an asshat question tonight. It's not the worst. It's not the worst kind of asshat we've had forever.
I like it.
Jesse voicing that looks like he's on 9 out of 9. Wow. I think, Jesse, I'm worried that you and I might fall out. That tends to be what happens with the asshat, especially when people reach the 9 out of 9. Graham Fraser is also on 9 out of 9. Squeaky bum time again, he's saying. That answer is under dispute. Still think it was me on 6 out of 9. If there's any disputes ever in a quiz, at the end, take the point, guys. There should never be disputes. If you think that there's something else that's, even if I make a mistake and the right answer wasn't there, take the point. You know the rules. Okay, James Morgan is saying, love an asshat. Here it comes. Question 10. This week, Ralphie re-reviewed Glencadam 10 with a score of 89. This was up from his score of 88 around 3 years ago. In A, review number 698, B, review number 878, or C, review number 558. Now, normally asshats, there's something that you learn from them. There's something to take away. But I apologise. This is just a wee bit awkward and obtuse at the end. But I did... Whiskey Central, I've allowed your swear. Don't worry about it, Sheila. Jeez. There's lots of asshat emojis coming out. But if you just pause for a moment, Sugar Kitty is screaming, what? Pause for a moment. It's not a total asshat question. Jerry Miller, absolutely right. What do you think, Iain? What would you go for?
Only I know it wasn't that long ago that you reviewed it, and I feel that 558 might be too far away, but I could be totally wrong.
Yes, review number 878 is the brand new Glencadam 10 review at 89. If you go back 3 years, so you're talking about he does a review a week, so you're speaking about somewhere just north of 150 reviews. That takes you to somewhere in the order of nearer 700 than it does 558. So absolutely a good reckoning. Well done. That's a good score in the end. You got a 7 out of 10.
I'll take that.
Which is a very good score. Absolutely. Let's take that away now. Just jump into the lounge and see how we're doing there. I'm nervously looking at Jesse to see if he's managed it.
10 out of 10, hello.
Jimmy Legacy, and I have a spreadsheet, but I won't look. Good for you, Jimmy. So you keep a spreadsheet of Ralphie's reviews as well. Has to be with the math right. A says Whiskey Central. Precarious Davis says, if you pause for a moment, there's time to Google it. Listen, people seem to be uptight about people Googling. If people want to Google a quiz at the end, go ahead, Google it. You're only playing against yourself.
Yeah, true. Don't be mad that Google's a quiz answer while the quiz is on.
Yeah, and I know that if you Google it, you can lead the crowd and things like that. Yeah. But it's all fun.
There is someone. Thomas is contesting the 88 Act, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was going to happen. But it's like I say, if it was actually firmly defined in 88. The single malt terminology, you can take that point as well. And it was only because I was reading up on the acts and things and I caught that commentary on it. I thought, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that it wasn't nailed down till 2009. I mean, I was enjoying whiskey in 2000. That's incredible. For it to be a legal term. So I was kind of semi-aware of that. If anybody answered 88 and wants to take that, they take it to the bank. Graham Fraser's on a 10 out of 10. Whoopie do. Helen's on a 9 out of 10 and she's celebrating as well. Well done, Helen. Well done, Graham. Superb.
Congratulations.
Somebody else is on a 10 out of 10 and I missed it. Andrew Butler's on 9 out of 10. Fantastic, Andrew. You always score amazing. Been drinking and enjoying this for a long time.
It's a nice wee honour to be amongst the barflies, so I do appreciate you having me tonight. I know that you guys are extremely knowledgeable, and even watching people answer Menno's quiz last week, I was quite impressed with some of the knowledge of you guys that are out there. So, I mean, guys collectively, of course, ladies, gentlemen, the whole shebang. I don't mean to, it's a bad term of phrase, but I don't want to be accused of saying that it's only guys out there. But yeah,
I know that. Well, I say guys as well, and I genuinely mean it in a kind of
in a plural sense of people. Yeah, exactly.
Term for people, absolutely. Yeah. Jesse Voisin got his 10 out of 10. Well done, Jesse. Superb. I'm very grateful we can stay friends. Whiskey Throstle saying I took the point and I got a 9 out of 10. It's not cheating at all, Daniel. Congratulations to you for your 9 out of 10. Superb. And Warner in the States is saying 4 out of 10. I blame the whiskey. You can blame anything you like. I implore, blame me, Warner. Please blame me. It's my fault. Absolutely fantastic. Iain, well done for your score as well. I hope you've had a wee bit of fun tonight. Listen, stay backstage if you can afford the time. I'll raise a wee glass with you and have a debrief after the credits roll. But I'll raise a glass and wish you the very best going forward in your new role.
Thanks very much.
We're obviously rooting for this to continue, this path that we're on to continue, and for it to be focused on as natural as it can be, as accessible as it can be. But we appreciate the challenges that you face in the future. Thanks for bringing your passion, your knowledge and your insight to us and sharing it with the barflies and everybody in the vPub tonight. And I look forward to raising a glass with you in the future again, my friend. Cheers, Iain.
Thank you, everybody. Slanch.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Excellent. Had a great time. It's very easy when you have people like Iain on. It's very easy to... It's the challenge is actually keeping it structured and keeping it kind of moving along and things, because if it was just me hanging out with Iain, we would see the small hours of the morning, if he would indulge me. It's that kind of vibe. And that's kind of what I want to try and capture in the vPub from time to time. It's just that idea that it is a pub. It's just like a conversation, and it's just like kind of getting our wee whiskey geek on and just appreciating this wonderful thing that we have that brings us together and allows us to escape from whatever it is that we're being challenged by outside of it. I think it's an amazing thing. I think it's a gift, and I think that that's why I'm so precious about it, and why it's so important to me that people like Iain, when they come along, have the attitude that he has, that he recognises the responsibility and the guardianship that lays ahead for him. Falsgraf is saying, no matter what my score is, I am impressed with the guest tonight. One for the history books, definitely tonight. Thank you so much, Falsgraf. Wonderful to have you. Ronald is saying, don't know about single malt being 1988 or 1980, but pure malt was banned in 1990. So there you go. But pure malt was actually the labelling used by Cardew as recently as 2003, but it did cause a bit of a stooshy back then. A bit of trouble. Jed Smith is saying, slant you to you both. Thank you so much, Jed. Hellswood is saying, another fab vPub and another fine guest. And Iain, slant you both. Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much. Oops, it jumps again. It always jumps. Scott McIntyre, thank you, Scott. He's saying, brilliant tonight. Whiskey Throttle Daniel, thank you for the distraction during this time of mourning with my family. Daniel, I send strength and love, big guy. You're a tower of a man. It's tough for me to hug you if we're standing in the same space. It's even harder from this distance, buddy. But please feel the strength and love that I'm sending to you tonight. You're in my thoughts, buddy. Cheers to you. I wish you and your family all the strength. I know it's going to be difficult for you. Simon Ray is saying, slant you to you and Iain. And Magic is saying, superb vPub again. Thanks again. Thank you, Magic. Jesse Voisin, cheers to all. Good night. Thanks for the great vPub. You'll be celebrating as well with your 10 out of 10, Jesse. Well done. Everyone is saying, great guest as always. Learn stuff, and that is a good thing. Thank you so much, everyone. Good to see you, and Chris. Steve A he's retracted his message. Sorry, you did that just as I was just about to read it. And JG is saying, whiskey. Cheers. JG, nice to have you. And Jerry Miller is saying, fun afternoon, Roy. Thank you. Tom Scaramouche is saying, cheers, Roy. Thanks for the evening. So sorry to everybody if I wasn't able to pick up your comments tonight. I will try to hang out with you on Sunday night for Jim McEwen's thing at 9 o'clock. If you're trying to buy a ticket, I should probably drop a link in for that now. It should be quite easy for me to just do that at the second. My Chrome browser should remember it. In fact, it does. I bought 11 of these tickets. No, I bought 12 actually, because I bought one for myself too. If you don't have yourself a ticket, remember it's for a very good cause. It's for the Scotland's Charity Air Ambulance as well, and you get to hang out with Jim McEwen, and it will actually be his last chat. I think he's looking forward to hanging up his boots and spending some quality time with family. Jimmy Leg is saying, see you Sunday, Roy. Jimmy, I look forward to seeing you there. Simon Ray is saying, see you on Sunday. Thanks for yet another excellent vPub. Molasses, thank you so much. I'm going to raise this glass like I always do. Look forward to seeing you next week. I don't know what the theme is yet. We've got something fun with Jesse down from Stillet. If you follow Jesse's channel, he's going to be releasing a video in the coming days that might hint towards something that we're getting together to do next week, but it's not going to be the entire theme. So I'm trying to come up with a theme that either fits with what we're doing with Jesse, or just an indulgent theme that just kind of celebrates community or getting together or something like that. But next week, I'm still not sure. But what you can guarantee is that there will be a vPub and we will get together next week. And I look forward to hanging out with you then. In the meantime, you're all very dearly loved. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next Thursday. Sláinte to you all. Thank you so much. The Andalucía is nice, but that 18 was remarkable. Good night.